Owen, just a kid, got trapped in a corner by two other students who wouldn't stop mocking him. They sneered that his house pepper was collapsing, picked at his parents for no real magic, and painted him as a total disgrace to his aristocrat name. Owen defiantly announced he was going to be a top-grade magician. Then he ripped a huge, blazing fireball into existence in his hand, making the two bullies jerk back in terror while a blonde girl watched with a quiet, knowing smile. Then the story flips back 2 years to an 8-year-old Owen Pepper, heavy-set and bursting with attitude, standing inside a fancy mansion, demanding food at the top of his lungs, begging for cake from a maid who tries to shut him down, insisting it's not time to eat yet. Still barking orders, he threatened to fire the maid if she didn't rush his cake, watching her turn visibly shaken and distressed. He crashed through the doorway headfirst, hitting the floor with a brutal thud that startled the two maids. One snapped to attention and rushed over, yelling in panic. As he sprawled dazed on the floor, the maids hovered over him, faces tight with worry that he'd cracked his head, and then, slowly, his senses started coming back. A brutal realization hit him like a truck. He wasn't just reborn, he'd been dropped into the body of this horrible little brat. Then it all clicked. He was Yuta Sasaki, the salaryman from his past life, and boy, did he remember how shamelessly arrogant and reckless he'd been right up until this very moment. Overwhelmed by shame, he tried to pull off a heartfelt dejiza, an apologetic deep bow to the bewildered maids, but his huge belly and heavy backside turned it into an awkward struggle, and the whole time he just wanted a hole to swallow him up. Then he turned his gaze to his new parents, watching them lounge at a ridiculously lavish dinner table stacked with an insane amount of food, as they casually bragged that everyone in a noble's lands exists only to be squeezed for money, so the aristocracy can keep eating. While Regent Pepper's feudal lord dad, Black Pepper, and his wife Aisha kept the feast rolling, everyone around them played along, because, yep, it was the people's duty to bankroll them. And that's when it hit him like a truck. He'd been reborn as the son of a truly vicious feudal lord. He knew those elitist parents, snobs who treated commoners like trash and wrung them dry, were hated by everyone, so much that people openly called them swine of a lord, and he also realized with a sick jolt that because he'd been raised by them, they trained him to be just as useless and just as full of contempt. He stared down at the giant roasted bird on his plate, then seethed at the fact that trashy parents somehow turned him into a pig, and he silently begged pardon to everyone in the territory. His parents clocked his empty appetite and pressed him for answers. Then he almost fired the head chef on the spot until he caught himself and admitted the truth. It wasn't the chef, it was that greasy, high-calorie food with barely any veggies that had wrecked his stomach. And in that moment, he cringed at his own hypocrisy, realizing he was about to chuck someone out over something just as small as what his parents had noticed. The head chef, stunned, instantly nodded along to Owen's demand, cut his portions down and make them healthier. And even though Owen managed to keep things calm with the chef for now, he vowed to watch his words from this moment on. He forced his legs into a sprint, his heavy body fighting for every step, until the strain slammed the air right out of him. Bent to the bone, he crumpled onto the ground, dead tired, and a butler rushed in with a towel for the young master. He grabbed the towel gratefully, suddenly feeling just how heavy his own body was, and how zero stamina he had even for something as simple as exercising. Then he thanked Seba's son. Still wrestling with his physical limits, Owen asked Sebas if he knew any diet tricks that actually worked. Then Sebas hit him with the wild suggestion, practice magic. The idea stunned Owen because sure, he'd heard magic was real, but he'd never once imagined it would be part of his own life. The world's chronicler made it clear, to be noble you need magic power, and sure, even run-of-the-mill nobles can use it, but Owen's parents could barely manage even a flicker, so the other aristocrats sneered at them, and only a tiny slice of commoners had the power to wield magic. Sebas admitted he couldn't cast magic himself, then said he'd pull in a specialist to train Owen, and Owen, instantly seeing that magic would drain his energy, nodded fast and asked, "All right, what do I do first?" Several days later, Owen stood outside because his magic lesson was about to start, right now, and he'd been so pumped he didn't sleep a single wink when a brand new figure finally stepped into view. The woman introduced herself as Katerina, bright with excitement for their lessons together, while Owen, stunned by her jaw-dropping beauty, could barely get the words out as he stammered. "Owen Pepper," he snapped himself together and bowed with a quick nod, then stepped up and said, "I'm Owen Pepper." Katarina's eyes widened just a little, and surprise flickered across her face as she took in his introduction. She watched Owen with a sly little smirk and said he looked nothing like she'd expected. Owen froze, then blurted out a startled, "Oh." He couldn't wait and asked if they should start the lesson right away, but Katerina froze, silently remembering the harsh rumors that labeled him a violent, selfish kid, and decided to keep that to herself. Then she asked what he wanted to know, and Owen shot her a knowing look and told her it wasn't anything important. Owen lit up with unshakable excitement and blurted, "Since you'll teach me magic, you're my teacher, no question," and Katerina had to steady herself because that bold certainty totally caught her off guard. With Owen's nod of approval, she finally agreed to spill the basics of magic for a moment, and together they set off toward the grand mansion. Katerina kicked off the lesson by telling Owen to feel the magic power inside him, then warned that using it demands imagination, and chanting usually flips the switch faster. Owen stood there with fists tight, trying to picture fire in his mind, because he knew he had to truly understand what he was aiming to create. As Owen wrestled with it, he blurted, "So what does magic power even feel like?" Confessing he'd felt nothing at all yet, Katerina paused, thinking hard about how to explain it. Then she leaned in, lit up her explanation. Magic to her didn't feel like spells or sparks, it felt like a warm living presence huddled around her body, and that was her power. Owen admitted with a shaky laugh that he still didn't get it. Then Katerina swooped in fast, telling him it usually takes about a week to find the rhythm of your magic, so he should stop panicking and just breathe. Against her words, Owen tapped into the memories of his past life and started digging inside himself. Then, boom, he found a fresh, blazing warmth in seconds, and the truth hit him hard. That was his magic power. Katerina stared like she'd just seen the impossible. Owen buzzed with excitement, saying he'd finally pulled off his magic move. Then Katerina, still reeling from how fast he'd surged, could only tell him to shift it around again, wondering what on earth was coming next. Sweat poured off him as he gritted through every movement, forcing his body to feel and control his magic. Then he blurted out, "Did all this effort finally make me lose weight, and did I really use magic right?" Katerina watched him surge forward and nodded, saying she'd figured it would take him about 10 days to get here. But nope, he'd mastered it because he's a straight-up magic genius. Caught off guard by the praise, he lit up with a grin and hurried to thank his teacher. While he celebrated, Katerina muttered under her breath, realizing the rumors about Owen had to be wrong. Then she went quiet, and Owen noticed her staring off and asked, "Are you okay?" She steadied her breathing, then told him exactly what came next for the magic. First, picture the result you want, then chant it, usually from your hand. She urged him to watch closely as she showed him, and he nodded, fully getting it. With Katerina following her own instructions to the letter, she chanted, "Come forth, fireball," and boom, a massive, spinning orb of fire erupted above her hand, leaving Owen staring in awe as real magic hit him right in the chest. After that jaw-dropping display, she leaned in and told Owen to give it a shot, and Owen snapped back with a fearless yes as he got ready to cast his very first spell. He started channeling his power into his right hand, but it was already wrecking him. His grip trembled as a faint glow ignited while he pushed through. Even with exhaustion written all over his face, he swore he was fine, until Katerina noticed and told him to slow down because it was only his first time. He brushed off his teacher's worries and drove himself harder, picturing the spell's power like it was already real, because nothing was going to stop him from using magic. With one final, bone-deep roar, he tore the power out of himself and screamed, "Come forth, fireball!" And Katerina's jaw dropped as he spat out a fireball so absurdly massive it dwarfed the one she'd just shown. He just hurled a massive fireball into the air, and his teacher, Katerina, went completely speechless, staring like she'd seen the impossible, yelling that it couldn't be done. Even he was shocked, mumbling, "How did I even pull off that magic?" Her voice cracked with shock and worry as she blurted his name. He jolted awake in his bed, confused out of his mind, and blurted out for Katerina. Then Sift, the butler, was suddenly right by his side, confirming he'd come around and asking if he'd passed out. Meanwhile, in the parlor, Lord Pepper lunged at Katerina, furious that she'd injured his son, even though he'd shelled out a fortune for the lessons himself. Sift blurted out the deepest apologies. And Sift heard the chaos, snapped awake, and realized the whole fight was because of his own injury. She snapped back hard, telling Lord Pepper to stop dragging her parents through the mud because sorry won't fix this, and when he scoffed, he basically declared that their loneliness was written all over them. With the argument spiraling out of control, Lord Pepper snatched Katerina and swore he'd personally teach her a lesson. Then he charged into the room, insisting he couldn't ignore that kind of stunt. He clenched his fist, eyes set like stone. Then Lord Pepper blinked in surprise when his son suddenly showed up and demanded, "What do you want?" Katarina watched his unshakable stance and knew plain old stop you quick wouldn't work. With a sly grin, he promised he'd put her in her place, and he dared her to step into the very same race with him. His father, Lord Pepper, ordered him to never go soft on her, so he just nodded, and that sly grin lit up his face like he'd already planned the trouble. She slipped into the room where Katarina waited, all worry and trembling, and asked what he planned to do to her, only for him to stay ice calm and tell her, nothing in particular. She faced him, still reeling from his challenge, while Owen, smirking just a little, asked if she was okay, throwing out a quick apology for what his father had done earlier. Her eyes snapped wide open, shock hitting like lightning, and then the realization finally started to dawn. Still shaking, she wondered if he'd truly saved her, but he just waved it off, saying it wasn't anything special at all. Suddenly, she pulled him into a tight embrace and declared, loud and certain, that she'd already made up her mind. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes as she swore she'd protect him, so he could grow up like a kid, not be shoved to maturity too soon in that disgusting, shameful place. Owen froze when her arms wrapped around him and she blurted out her feelings, a hot blush surging up his face, because she'd totally misread his intentions, but he couldn't deny her warmth or the surprising gentleness in how she held him. 2 years later, Owen had blown up in size and power, stronger in body, sharper with magic. Every day he drilled his spells without stopping, shaping his wild ideas into real hits, and now he could hurl a blazing fireball like it was nothing. He lived for that rush, convinced there was no thrill like watching his own imagination come to life, while Katarina stayed close, right there beside him. Thanks to relentless training, Owen had shed nearly all his extra weight, yet he still felt a stubborn little beer belly hanging on. Right as he was bragging about his progress to Katarina, Sharpest the butler swept in and told the young master that a letter had finally arrived for him. Sharpest said the letter wasn't just paper, it was a VIP invite to the upcoming 10th birthday bash for Ducal House Adelaide's daughter. Owen chewed on the thought of whether his parents would actually show up. He was still just a kid. Sharpest straight up assured him they'd come and warned him not to turn down an invite like that. Owen decided to play it safe and ask his parents, just in case. His parents, Lord and Lady Pepper, blew up in outrage at the invitation. Lord Pepper thundered that even the thought of showing up to something like that was stupid, and Lady Pepper shot back the same fury, insisting they'd never go. He watched their blow up and instantly got the picture. They probably didn't want to show up and they expected this kid to go it alone, but honestly, he didn't really care either way. His mind wandered to the brutal social ladder of their world, where nobles ruled on raw magical power, and he couldn't ignore the fact that his parents could barely cast a spell, which probably explains why they kept dodging high society at every turn. Still, he knew plain as day if a count's family like his turned down a duke's invitation, it wouldn't just be rude, it would spark offense. His parents clearly carried some kind of insecurity about crashing noble gatherings, and deep down, he admitted it hit the same nerve in him, too. He let out a heavy sigh, clocking his own social awkwardness, because when you're a loner and you can't read the room, you don't get a choice, you go alone. He remembered the guy he used to be, arrogant and convinced he was beneath everyone, until he finally snapped back into his old life's memories, stumbling mess after mess, until people started inviting him to fewer and fewer social events. A week later, he faced his own reflection, feeling the fire of determination return. He'd shed the extra weight, and he was sure this time it would all work out. He could do this. As he arrived at the grand ducal house, Adelaide hit him with a sharp jolt of nerves, hoping he wouldn't stick out like a sore thumb, all because he was still trying to live up to the etiquette butler Sharpest had pounded into him, line by line, so he wouldn't wreck his reputation before it even had time to breathe. And that's when a refined noble nearby revealed it. This was House Adelaide's celebration. While the crowd buzzed with murmurs, Natalie Adelaide, young, long white-haired, and the daughter of the house, stepped off the magnificent staircase and started descending, turning every eye to her the moment she appeared. He stared at her, completely locked in. Yo-oh, what a cute girl, he thought. She looked straight up like an angel. He caught himself staring at Natalie Adelaide, the ducal house's daughter, and thinking, I'm the weird, infamous loner, she's all bright, shining life while I'm the dark contrast. When she flashed that dazzling smile, he couldn't ignore how insanely far apart their worlds truly were. Hungry for a break from the chaos, he stepped out onto a sweeping balcony above the garden's endless green, and the silence hit him like a wave, steady, soothing, and calm. Up in his spot, he spotted Natalie again, now laughing and talking with a crowd of nobles, yet even with her perfect, blessed smile, he couldn't shake the feeling that a dark little shadow was creeping into her joy. Just as he thought he finally had a moment of peace, she swept onto the balcony, so close he nearly jumped out of his skin, because he'd been sure he was alone, and the instant he caught sight of her, he gasped and realized it was Natalie. A few beats later, Owen, now clearly identified, found himself on an upper balcony, staring down as a long blonde girl introduced herself as Natalie Adelheid, a young lady from the ducal family, and blurted out how shocked she was to see another person there. Then he introduced himself as Owen Pepper and hailed her as the lead actor of the day, and you could tell that totally caught her off guard. Natalie, still reeling from her shock, pressed him hard about his family's notorious reputation. Was he really that irritable, always ready to snap like the rumors claimed? Owen just barked a laugh and admitted it was all true, stunned that even a ducal young lady had heard about their temper. As he talked, Natalie snapped back that he was still a kid, scolding him for acting like an adult. He spilled that his introspective streak was behind his mature vibe, like he'd reached the age where he finally wanted to act grown. Natalie watched him from below and couldn't shake the feeling he was plain weird, especially after hearing the rumors floating around about him. Owen misread her comment, so he thanked her, then she shot back fast that she wasn't praising him at all, and just casually added that he was a perfect way to kill time. Even on his birthday, he swallowed it with a heavy sigh like he'd already given up. Natalie, now the spotlight, told them straight, this so-called birthday party wasn't a celebration at all. It was a fancy public unveiling, like an exhibit where she had to act perfect the whole time for her ducal family. With a heavy sigh, she admitted it was her duty just for being born into a ducal family, and since she was the star attraction that day, she couldn't dodge the fact that she had to entertain every guest. She sank into deep thought, a heavy sadness hanging on her face, and she finally admitted there was nothing left she could do about her situation. He watched her in stunned silence, as quiet resignation settled over her like a final goodbye. Owen finally spoke up, reminiscing about how birthdays in his old world used to feel like pure joy for kids, and he wondered if aristocratic children here felt the same, only for Natalie to cut in with a blunt, simple answer. No, then Owen went on, remembering what a teacher told him, how childhood is precious and how it'd be a real waste to waste it bored. With a grin blazing across his face, he thrust his hand toward her, daring her to come out and play. She shot him a look over her shoulder, eyes bulging with shock at his sudden, unexpected move. He leaned in close, his grin never slipping, and told her today was her big day, her birthday as the main character, so she better ditch that dull face before it ruins the moment. Natalie saw it totally different, thinking about how her mint was stuck playing host all day for everyone, and yeah, it didn't sound like much fun. Oh, he pulled up and basically said that nothing mattered more than what she wanted to do, and before she could even react, he yanked her hand in his grip, making her jump. Still gripping her hand, he leaned in and swore they were already friends, then practically begged her to come with him. Natalie gaped at him, completely stunned, the word friends ringing in her head while her eyes went wide with disbelief. Still gripping Owen's hand, Natalie snapped that they'd get caught if they slipped through the main hall, and Owen shot back that he'd rather lead her into the garden. She pressed him on where they'd end up, but he brushed off her fears like they didn't matter. With a cocky grin, he announced that 2 years of training had finally paid off. Then he thrust a glowing orb into the air and shouted, "Earth." After that, he reached for Natalie and urged her, "Come on," pushing her toward a nearby staircase as he led the way. Right as they hit the stairs, a man's voice snapped, "Natalie." Then it turned to, "Natalie, what are you doing?" and demanded she come back at once. Then the whole plan blew up. Owen yanked Natalie, yelled, "Release gravity," and the two of them launched off the balcony. Natalie gasped as she started to drop, a shimmering aura blazing around her as Owen's magic kicked in. Owen clutched her tight as they plunged downward, grit hard on his face, while Natalie stared with wide, stunned eyes, shocked by the sudden drop. Still clutched in Owen's grip, she blurted out in pure shock that they were actually flying, and her mind spun, begging the question, was this real flight magic or just her imagination running wild? From the balcony, the man Natalie called father and a second adult stared in total shock as Owen and Natalie drifted away, and the father figure blurted, "Flight magic," before his voice cracked into pure disbelief, "Impossible." Owen paused for a breath and told everyone this was his specialty magic, something he forged by mixing what he remembered from a past life with Katarina-sensei's sharp teachings, and he made it clear that in this world, everyone's so stuck on the idea that everything clings to the ground that they can't even begin to understand what magic is really supposed to do. Because he carried the memories of a past life, knowing that gravity drags everything straight down, he finally understood this magic for real, and snapped the old rules that were holding everyone's minds in chains. They wrapped it up by saying flight magic was one of the most special powers around, and way back in the day, only a select few witches could use it. He clutched Natalie tight and kept flying higher and higher, riding that wild feat of flight magic, so Katarina-sensei insisted that he was the only one right now who could even pull it off. Up in the air, Natalie gasped in pure joy, staring down as her tiny house shrank beneath her, and soaring through the sky felt unreal. Meanwhile, Owen looked absolutely worn out, but still forced a tired grin and said it was his birthday gift, and Natalie thanked him back. His relentless effort was starting to crush him. He admitted carrying 2 people felt brutally heavy, and he couldn't keep flying much longer, and Natalie, stunned, snapped, "Wait, what did you just say?" She whipped around to face him, her expression twisting with pure indignation as she blasted him for calling her heavy, and demanded he correct himself. All he could do was spit out a quick apology. He just glanced aside, that faint smile still flickering on his lips, and let out a quiet, effortless sound that meant nothing for sure. Moments later, the flight cut out hard and they slammed onto the ground. Owen immediately crumpled to hands and knees, completely wiped out, while Natalie gasped, realizing he'd finally pushed past his limit. As they finally caught their breath after that landing, Natalie poked at him nonstop, slamming him with "Where did that skill come from?" and daring him to admit his awful reputation might be fake. He went bright red and stumbled through an excuse, insisting it was just him being young and wanting to prove he could act grown. Natalie only laughed because she'd heard that line a million times before. Suddenly, Natalie caught this faint music leaking from the grand hall, even from way over there, and she wondered if they should slip back soon, while Owen didn't let her worry for a second, asking if she was having fun, even if it meant he was treating her like a kidnapper. Natalie hesitated, admitting she hadn't really. She snapped the topic away and blurted, "Owen, can you dance?" He froze, eyes wide, and asked why on earth they were talking about that. She shrugged it off like it was nothing and said, "I don't care, it's time to dance right now." Then she dropped the real bombshell. As the main actor, she had to kick off the dances in the middle of the hall tonight, and she ordered Sir Abductor to take responsibility. He looked totally flustered by her demand, yanked out the truth that he wasn't exactly good at dancing, and his hands were still slick with sweat. Then he admitted it was his fault. She shot her hand out and asked him to give her this dance. He weighed it for a second, then nodded, only if she was still okay with their plan, and under the full moon's soft glow, with the garden leaves whispering around us, they slid into the music like the notes themselves were floating through the night. As they kept dancing in front of the grand mansion, he couldn't ignore it. He felt awkward as hell, but they both pushed through and gave it everything they had, and in that moment he knew it. This was the real start of Natalie's and his first genuine encounter. A young guy gets reincarnated as the son of a ruthless lord, and you'd think that'd crush him, but nope, magic lights up his world, and he's always rolling around with a wide-eyed blonde girl and a calm, silver-haired companion by his side. Owen Pepper, the young lord, kicks off the 3rd chapter of his journey, glossy grin on his face, sitting on a mountain of luggage as he gears up for brand new adventures. Meanwhile, Natalie's father, Ralph Adelheid, stood in front of a grand estate with jaw set tight, grilling everyone about the exact circumstances behind his daughter's supposed kidnapping. He couldn't stop staring at the shock. His daughter had somehow become close friends with the eldest son of House Pepper, and he had zero clue this was happening. Watching the man's furious intensity, Owen clocked just how terrifying his anger really could get, while Natalie only smiled, remembering their friendship like it was yesterday. Ralph's stern face snapped into a huge, booming laugh. His frown vanished under a wide grin as he burst out that he understood. Owen was just a friend. With one last command for Owen to keep things smooth with Natalie, Ralph spun around and strode off, no doubt left now that whoever was a scoundrel had slipped away with his daughter, and his fears were finally gone. As Natalie walked away, she leaned toward Owen and joked that even he could get nervous. Then Owen let out a breath, finally seeing it clearly. Ralph hadn't been angry at all, just overloaded with stress. Owen sagged into a wave of relief, thankful Ralph was level-headed and that he hadn't been killed, because he knew Duke Adelheid wasn't just the king's prized pillar of the nation, but a monster at magic who could crush a guy like him in a heartbeat, both physically and socially. Natalie shifted the conversation like a blade, noting they'd probably be stuck with each other for ages, and then she pressed Owen, asking if he was planning to join a magic school someday too. When the magic school got brought up, Owen froze, like it finally clicked that he should have been accepted into a place like that, and while he was still reeling, Natalie just casually dropped that she'd be heading to Zansar herself. He watched as Natalie reached out with a warm smile, telling him she really hoped they'd become friends and end up in the same school someday. He shot her a quick yes, pumped her hand hard, and just like that, their friendship was locked in. When he finally stumbled back home, the butler welcomed him with open arms and fired off questions about the party, so he grinned and proudly told him he'd made a brand new friend. The butler practically lit up at the news, then quickly steered the conversation, drilling into what magic school he'd be attending in just 6 months, and with a grin, he revealed that his new buddy Natalie was headed to Zansar too. To his stunned disbelief, the butler straight up confirmed that Zansar was his school too. Then the instant relief hit him so hard that excitement surged through him like a wave. Then he grilled the butler about Katerina-sensei, a Zansar alum, and the butler told him to track her down for answers about the school. Meanwhile, in class, Katerina-sensei snapped into her lecture and declared that today's topic would be magic academies. She broke it down plain and loud. Most noble kids get shoved into magic school at 10, not for fun, but as an obligation. Then they use their wild power to serve society. She also said commoners can join too, but they've got to pay tuition. And there he sat in the classroom, still stuck with half a year left before his own enrollment. He spoke up about his fears after watching his parents live by discriminatory doctrines, and he couldn't stop wondering, would aristocrats and commoners collide when they're forced to sit in the same classroom? Katerina admitted that clashes like this could happen, then hit him with the truth. Zansar ran on merit, not bloodlines, and your skill mattered more than where you were born. As he finally took it in, everything clicked, and understanding started to settle in. As Katerina kept lecturing and ripping through talk of other schools, fresh motivation surged through him. He couldn't help but wonder just how far his own magic could take him. He pictured himself making real friends and finally getting the recognition he'd been chasing for his magic, and guess what? He was already starting to pull it off, while Katerina-sensei's voice kept ringing in his head, demanding, "Are you listening?" 6 months later, the day he had to leave finally slammed into place, and those months before it were pure adrenaline as he counted down to his enrollment. Right before he set off, he weighed whether to send Natalie a letter, because Zansar had promised him an environment that would genuinely live up to the hype. Right at the doorway, he blinked. Only the butler and that woman with the glasses had shown up to see him off, and his face instantly twisted into something between guilt and disbelief before he brushed it aside, knowing his awful history probably earned him that thin, awkward send-off. He realized there was no undoing what he'd already done, and a crushing regret flooded his chest. He just wished he'd shown everyone a lot more kindness. A sharp flash of the past hit himself, younger and rounder, acting horribly toward the maids, and the thought landed hard. They had to hate him for that cruelty. By the time he finally made it back home, he could only pray they'd forgive him, just a little, while the butler and the woman with glasses stared him down, their faces giving nothing away. He shot a glance at the butler, and the man just stared back like he could feel the storm brewing inside him. Suddenly, his eyes popped wide. Outside, every last staff member was lined up, maids and chefs included, shouting his name and sending him off with heartfelt wishes for a safe trip. The maids, faces full of sincerity, pushed him to hit the books and grow into someone great, then warned him to stay razor-sharp on the road. To the chefs, equally worried, they fired off their own advice: don't ever grab food off the floor and keep eating in moderation, but make sure every bite stays nutritious. He froze in shock as the butler, normally all sharp rules and stern tradition, spoke with surprising warmth, admitting the last 2 years had changed Owen completely, and while he couldn't say what sparked it, the whole house could see it. Owen looked completely flustered by the revelation, but then Katerina-sensei stepped in, hooked a hand on his shoulder, and made it clear that she'd seen every ounce of effort he'd poured into becoming this version of himself. He battled the shock of that kindness in his own head, realizing that even if those old actions happened before his memories came back, they still belonged to him, and then he remembered how sure he'd been they'd throw him out of the house on a cruel, colder note. And there he was, standing there receiving the warmest send-off imaginable, with even the maids and chefs nearby cheering him on. With a real smile and a grateful wave, he thanked them again and again, saying he'd never forget how they kept treating a guy like him kindly, stuck with him even when he insisted otherwise, and now escorted him out like he mattered. Chefs and maids alike closed in around him, pulling him into warm embraces, cheering their hearts out like their young master had just lit up the whole house. Katerina-sensei closed the distance, smiling as she told him she was genuinely thrilled to teach him magic, and that she'd always wanted to keep him safe. He met her gaze, calling her the best teacher he could ever hope for, and thanked her for handing over her magical knowledge. She pulled him into a tight hug, promised she'd always stand by his side, and sweetly called him her precious pupil. And just like that, the carriage lurched into motion, hauling him toward the royal capital and the wild road ahead. He finally burst into the royal capital, heart slamming in his chest as he couldn't wait for what was about to hit him next. As he glanced around, he spotted horse carriages piling up in a massive traffic jam, and it hit him. Everyone was rushing to the Magic Academy. He muttered, "Guess there's nothing we can do, we'll just have to wait," even though the thought nagged at him. How are they being stalled like this? Right out of nowhere, a booming voice shattered the air as a young man with a sharp scar on his cheek shoved forward and yelled that his court rank entitled him to pass, like that somehow mattered. Owen watched him and clocked him as a total nuisance, then kept his distance, but the moment the claim hit the air, someone shut him down hard. Court rank had zero weight here. Just nearby, a light-haired girl in a hooded cloak stepped forward and introduced herself as Foreign Antonelli, and Owen, watching her steady calm, instantly knew she was brave. She coolly snapped that they weren't nobles, leaving that arrogant young man stunned, and he demanded her name, grilling her about which noble house she belonged to because he'd never heard a thing about the Antonelli. She snapped back just like she told him before that those titles meant nothing here, and that at this school, raw ability was all that mattered. The arrogant young man scoffed and accused her of trying to defy a marquis family, then bragged that he'd finally show her what he was really made of. Owen watched the clash spiral, and he knew this was about to go seriously wrong fast. Fury blazing across his face, he launched a flame bullet straight at Farn, and Farn stared back with eyes blown wide in shock. The dark-clad arrogant noble snapped a flame bullet at the frightened, foreign-cloaked girl, then she bolted in terror. To his shock, that flame bullet didn't just veer off, it cracked apart into icy shards, and the noble stood there, eyes huge, blurting out the only word his disbelief could manage. Moments later, Owen Pepper sprinted to the cloaked girl's side, demanding to know if she was okay. Then she assured him she was safe and hit him back with a sincere, heartfelt thank you. The arrogant noble was still reeling from that wild deflection, so he marched straight up to Owen and Farron, barking demands for Owen's identity, while Owen, against all sense, couldn't take his eyes off Farron's delicate look. Owen introduced himself as Owen Pepper of Count Pepper's house, and the noble jerked like he just remembered him. Then came a cold, veiled warning, "Don't play with fire," with a clear jab that it meant Owen's family. Owen's face tightened the second he felt the threat. Owen slammed down the denial, insisting he never meant to hurt some lowly girl, and he demanded why he'd even bother. Then, with the foreign girl clutched protectively in his arms, he fired back, "So what are you calling my actions if not anything but playing around?" His tone sharp with pure challenge. As their argument spiraled into chaos, the arrogant noble smirked and aimed to blast a flame bullet and a fireball at the same time, while Owen snapped into action, chanting his own magic to freeze his opponent solid. Right when their spells were about to collide, a brutal wave of ice detonated between them, slamming up a giant barrier. Then a tall woman stepped out, chewed them both out, and told them to stop wrecking the place with all that noise. The woman, Dominic Sylphide, the next head of a powerful Duke family, stood there like pure authority, and the smug noble finally noticed the badge on her uniform. His breath hitched as he realized she was a 3-stars mage, one of the kingdom's rare elite magic users. Dominic stood like a judge and demanded why a 3-star mage would show up here, while Owen stared on, stunned and completely baffled. She then dropped her real identity. She'd become a teacher at Zansar, and before Owen and Natalie even got officially enrolled, she shot them a hard warning, "Don't cause any more trouble." Realizing just how heavy her words were, Owen and Natalie rushed to apologize, while Owen made it clear he understood. After that brutal run-in, they slipped into the school wards without any more trouble, while the arrogant noble, clearly furious, spun around and stormed off. Owen stood alone outside the school and finally let out a relieved breath, because after everything that happened when he arrived, his real school life was about to kick off. Then it hit him, Dominic's power was unreal, and he couldn't stop thinking, could I actually become a 3-star magician one day too? He snapped himself back to the stuff he had to do right now, debating whether to worry about moving into a dorm and unpacking, but he decided to shove all that aside and focus first on getting used to the school environment. Fired up with fresh purpose, he clenched his fist and vowed he'd give it everything he had. The story snaps to the day of the school entrance ceremony. Owen, fresh in a brand new formal uniform, stared himself down and couldn't stop wondering if he actually pulled it off. As he strode down the school hallway, he double-checked his class assignment and snapped to the fact he was in Class A. Then a voice from somewhere out of sight greeted him like it had been ages. He suddenly found himself staring straight at Natalie Adelheid, and she lit up his world with a radiant smile. He couldn't help noticing she'd dropped a bit of weight, and yeah, it didn't sit right with him, even as he tried to look composed. All around them, other students leaned in and whispered, dying to figure out what their relationship really was. Natalie asked him how he was doing. He shot back a cold no, and that answer clearly rattled her, even as he steeled himself to stay strong and not let her reaction throw him off. His surprise kept exploding as Natalie leaned in and admitted she'd been totally bored without him and that she couldn't ever forget that night. Those words hit him like a shockwave, leaving him flustered, trying to wrap his head around what they really meant. While the other students kept whispering and guessing about their relationship, he couldn't shake the fear that people would get the wrong idea, until Natalie just brushed it off, calmly confirming they were in the same class like it was the most obvious thing on earth. Then he shot back, "So how does the school pick our classes if not by our abilities?" Natalie answered fast. "Zansar splits students into classes A through D using their family's peerage, never their talent." She explained that most students get split the same way from the start because magic runs in the blood, strongly, no questions asked, but then she admitted there are a few rare exceptions. Natalie then told him she really hoped they'd click and share the same class for the next 8 years, and you could practically see his shock hit the moment the words landed. He nervously nodded to give it a shot as Natalie warned that the real division viability wouldn't start for 2 more years. Right then, a voice from the front barked for everyone to take their seats, pointing out just how many brand new faces had shown up. The moment the teacher, sharp, confident, and sure of herself, stepped up and introduced her name as Chris Clifford, the 3-star magician, he froze, because he instantly realized she was the same teacher who had just shut down his fight earlier. Chris Clifford and Natalie locked eyes, and both of them knew this was wild. Having a 3-stars magician as a homeroom teacher for first years was unreal. Then Chris told the class to introduce themselves and made it clear she didn't care who went first. Right as she had the students introduce themselves, a young man shot to the front, Berg Written, the 3rd prince, and asked, with perfect politeness, that everyone treat him just like anyone else, royalty or not. The whole class lit up with awe, with some students going, "Handsome" and "Wonderful." Next, a short-haired, light-haired girl stepped up and said she was Foreign Antonelli, and Owen's face lit up as he realized she was the same girl from that time, while Natalie gasped, whispering, "Saints." Owen and Natalie huddled over foreign matters, and when it clicked that her sacred magic was insanely rare, everything made sense, why a commoner like her ended up in their top-tier class. He didn't waste a second. He stepped up and introduced himself as Owen Pepper. The moment his name hit the air, the other students started whispering like wildfire, clinging to rumors that the Pepper family was crumbling and that Owen had failed so badly it sounded inhuman. Chris Clifford watched in silence, then nudged him, "Keep going." He swallowed hard and admitted it. Those rumors about him had blown up way bigger than he ever expected. Even with the whispers nipping at his ears, he kept going, straight up admitting he was still green, but promising he'd grow with everyone and climb his way to becoming a first-class magician. He wrapped up his intro with a glowing grin, basically begging to team up with his classmates. Natalie watched him, and a soft smile lit up her lips. Meanwhile, some students whispered that Owen didn't match the rumors at all, like he was just a normal guy, but then Owen dropped his gaze, clenched his fist, and the look on his face hit me like a punch. He tightened his clenched fist even more, fury and grit blazing across his face as he fought to hold back something powerful. A hooded figure sat on the windowsill like a shadow, watching everything in total silence, and with a smug little smile curling at their lips, they uttered, "Found one." Hooded figures leaned in, their eyes locking onto Owen Pepper as his face twisted with envy and pure disgust, and the cloaked observer quietly realized, just like before, that Owen could be the perfect test subject for a certain medicine, and they finally found one. With the hood up and watching in secret, they decided to start by testing the metal first, because if everything lined up right, Owen Pepper, now seated in class beside that silver-haired girl, could be the perfect key for their experiments. Katerina Sensei, new teacher, zero patience, slammed the usual curriculum and said that wasn't her style, claiming she'd teach them herself and skip the whole self-intro circus by sending everyone straight to the training field that day. She even admitted she's fresh at this job, but insisted the students show off their power right now, and Owen and another student just stared in stunned surprise at her wild plan. The academy wasn't just some school building, it sprawled into training grounds for brutal magical practice and a packed business district jammed with all kinds of shops, all cooking up the perfect, non-stop learning vibe for its students. As the students streamed along, Natalie matched Owen's suspicions, telling him this school wasn't just a building, it was basically a whole city district by itself. On the elementary education practice field, a huge crowd of students packed in, and Katarina-sensei called them together, because before they tested their own powers, they had to hammer out the basic magic concepts first. She kicked things off by asking if anyone knew the four main magic elements: fire, water, earth, and wind, and when everyone nodded, she leaned in and demanded to know why those four were chosen as the primary ones. Owen snapped back that these pieces were easier to picture, and that's why they could take shape, because magic surged to match whatever you could imagine. Out of nowhere, a roaring burst of ice magic exploded through the air, and a brutal command echoed, "Freeze over." Katarina-sensei stood right in the heart of the icy blast, and with one brutal display, she proved to her gathered students just how terrifying her ice magic really was. Owen then went on a wild rant about why he's so good at ice magic. Turns out growing up in a snowy country taught him ice's cold bite like second nature. One classmate shot him a nasty look of annoyance, while another leaned in and stared at him like he'd just unlocked a secret. Katarina-sensei snapped with confidence, told the students to smash the designated wall with their deadliest magic, and reminded them that they'd been training their own spells for this moment all along. Now, right as the lesson kicked off, a bespectacled guy stepped forward and blurted, "Water, go," as he tried to cast a spell, but Katarina-sensei clocked exactly how weak it was, then told everyone, "Oh, and watch this demonstration." After that first demonstration, Berg-Ritten surged ahead using a body-strengthening technique, while Natalie Adelheid flashed a confident grin and fired off a crushing lightning lance. Katarina-sensei watched in awe, clearly impressed by how skilled they were. Their mind-blowing displays lit up the whole hall, and Katarina-sensei leaned in to say their magic was surprisingly solid. Around them, students whispered in awe, instantly clocking the prince's skill and the duke's daughter's power. Watching everyone's reactions, Owen's mind sprinted to his own powers, and he flashed a grin, then teased out loud, what if he could melt the ice with his flames if he followed the lesson's flow? With a jolt of power, he shouted *fire bullet and launched his spell. Dark flames churned into a swirling mass right in front of him, and for a split second, the sheer force of it left him staring. He'd finally unleashed his magic, then whipped around to the crowd with a grin that looked half-manic, throwing up a confident gesture like, "See, that's it." Right away, Foreign Antonelli came charging to his side, fretting that he'd been burned and offering to heal him on the spot, while Owen just couldn't stop thinking about whether that last spell was meant for him. Glasses-wearing male student stood there, watching the whole exchange like it mattered. She didn't hesitate for a second. She launched right into healing, chanting for sacred light to mend him, and a gentle glow wrapped around Owen's arm. The burn vanished fast, and Katarina-sensei watched that miracle unfold, openly calling Foreign's power the real gift of a saintess. Right as the healing finally wrapped up, Farron struck up a new conversation, then suddenly asked what time it was, thanked him for that other time without warning, and Owen blurted out a shocked yell. Natalie and the silver-haired girl cornered him fast, teasing him about his romantic taste, and Natalie even reminded him how he once saved her when Dominic started trouble before school. Then she leaned in and asked, "So is that the kind of girl you go for?" He snapped back hard and his face went beet red. As he tried to dodge the question, the silver-haired girl stepped in and slammed him with one more round, pressing him harder about what kind of girl he's supposed to like. Even though he swaggered and insisted, no doubt about it, his type was blonde hair and blue eyes, something inside him still crumbled, because he couldn't quite pin down the exact person he meant. Just as the fight in his head started to spiral, it hit him. He was late. With a sharp shout, he bolted off at full speed, leaving the two girls standing there. Elsewhere, a bunch of students, Bird, the glasses kid, and that arrogant noble among them, were trading whispers about Owen, insisting he was Pepper, and that the rumor says he can barely cast a lick of magic. He couldn't ignore it. Every eye in the room was locked on him now, all thanks to that fireball stunt and the fact that his own daughter was right there. Pumped with determination to make a real impact, he decided he'd show them exactly what he could do, then realized his fire magic clashed with Dominic's, so he'd have to prove his power another way. Moments later, gas-escaped Chris Clifford, Owen's teacher, gasped as Owen suddenly shot into the air, flying with no grip, and she blurted out that it was The whole classroom gasped right along with her, and Chris just couldn't stop staring. He was shocked that someone who wasn't a witch could pull off flight magic this clean and proper. Berg and the glasses kid traded wide-eyed looks, muttering if it was really just wind magic. But that arrogant noble scoffed and waved it off like, "It's nothing, she's just floating a bit on wind." That arrogant noble stayed completely unmoved, sneering at Owen's audacity to fly with nothing but wind magic, even as Owen kept hovering with arms stretched wide. Katarina-sensei faced her students and admitted that some nailed the magic and others stumbled today, but she told them to stop stressing. Then she smirked and promised that a 3-star mage like her would teach them everything from here on out, and she shut the lesson down for the day. She snapped her hand up, sending the class scattering, and right as the lesson officially ended, Owen's face lit up with pure shock. Then he whirled toward Natalie and asked what she planned to do next. She grinned and said she was just heading back to the dorm. Natalie clocked that she was finally free, then blurted, "Come with me," and dragged him toward the business district for a full-on shopping spree. He couldn't stop wondering if that sudden invitation was secretly a date, his face flushing the second the thought hit. Moments later, they burst into the bustling shopping area, an electric district packed with all kinds of shops and places. As they headed out, she pressed him on what he planned to buy, and he shrugged, saying he didn't have anything specific in mind because everything he needed had already been shipped from home. She grinned at him and said, "We're just checking things out today, so don't worry, your curiosity about this new place is exactly what we're aiming for." He couldn't help but smile at her boundless enthusiasm, and yeah, he had to admit he was genuinely dying to explore these new surroundings with her. They pushed deeper into the market, weaving past bustling vendors and crowded stalls, while Owen lit up and pointed out every cool thing he spotted, and Natalie just smiled, soaking up every moment with him. While Owen and Natalie were busy enjoying their outing, a bespectacled male student suddenly stormed up, rattled and furious, demanding his medicine from Owen. Owen froze in shock, caught between confusion and concern, and Natalie just stared with wide eyes as the whole scene exploded in front of her. The student shot forward again, hammering home his demand for the medicine, and Owen knew he didn't have a second to whip out a fireball, because the attack came out of nowhere and left him wide open. Then the student cranked up gravity magic, lifted into the air, and slammed straight into Owen, so fast and sudden it left him totally blindsided. Owen slammed hard to the ground, and Natalie barreled over at once, demanding to know if he was okay, while a dark-haired student watched from afar, stunned by the attacker's bizarre behavior. The dark-haired student shot forward, throwing himself into the moment to apologize for the chaos, then boldly called the furious attacker his friend. Owen and Natalie stared at him, shocked by how fast he flipped the entire situation. He told them that his friends were plagued with neurosis and that they must have wiped out his sedatives. Then he leaned in and promised Owen and Natalie he'd personally go straight to the teachers and squash their worries. Then the dark-haired student broke into a smile, stunned by the unthinkable windfall he'd just stumbled into. Owen, still down on the ground, realized he'd only meant to see if the other student could be bait to rile up the dark-haired kid. Then the attacker broke the script with flight magic. The dark-haired student shot a look back at Owen and Natalie, his face tightening as the shock hit him. Maybe Owen was suddenly the real reason all this attention was turning his way. 2 weeks flew by since the entrance ceremony, and the students finally settled into their new daily routine, while their female teacher broke down magic with thrilling clarity. A full magic power fused with physical materialization to form that in-between state, giving them smooth, free control. He actually enjoyed studying magic, but the deeper, tougher theories started to feel way too much like chemistry. Later, out in the elementary practice field, she grinned and declared that today's lesson was all about mastering magic control. She broke it down like a pro. Magic control meant pulling your own power in tight, then locking it onto one single point with total focus. Meanwhile, among the students, the blonde girl smirked and said they could pull off something like that already, at least to a lesser degree, like it wasn't even a new idea to them. The teacher kept going, showing them exactly how the gap between the caster and the magic could juice it up or drain it dry. She explained that the school didn't exactly brag about long-distance magic because the farther you stretched it, the harder it got, and your magic's impact faded until it looked pretty unimpressive. He leaned back into himself and muttered what's the point of a technique that gets weaker the second you need it most? Swapping his mindset on the spot, he shouted, "Come forth, ice flow," and a massive, jagged shard of ice slammed into existence high overhead, making the next male student gasp in pure shock. With a single flick of his hand, he shattered the massive ice floe in an instant, crackling it into a sea of glittering shards and proving he'd mastered it in ways nobody saw coming. While the students stared at the protagonist's wild display in disbelief, their teacher shot right back into the lesson, explaining that different kinds of attacks were on the table, so their tactics could shift on the fly. She showed that if your magic only comes from right where you stand, your enemies can read you like a book, then they lock in their defenses and block your attack before it even lands. She went on to warn that a foe could just guess where the shots would land, throw up a wall or something like it, and even practice dodges if the magic's source was too easy to spot. Then she fired a question that hits like a punch. What if, right in the middle of a back-and-forth clash, a chunk of ice comes crashing down from above? Now the enemy can't focus on just one front anymore. They've got to split their attention across a dozen threats, and their concentration starts to crack under the pressure. She made it crystal clear some people could sling long-distance magic and the rest couldn't. She told us one of her acquaintances could steer her magic from tens of meters away, and they could do it freely, though she'd never teach it to that full level, not for real. The protagonist leaned in and listened, dead serious. She told the students to grab their favorite magics and fire them off at farther and farther distances, assuring them there was nothing to fear while they learned. Then she called out for anyone with questions to come ask before she turned away. Right on cue, practice kicked off. Right when the students kicked off their practice, the protagonist stumbled over every move, mumbling that this stuff was ridiculously hard, while he kept thinking about how Katarina-sensei had always crushed long-distance magic, like she'd been an absolute legend the whole time and he just never realized it. Frustration hit him hard. He didn't want to waste time waiting for his turn just to get advice. Then it hit him, how in the world had everyone else lined up so fast? Then he caught himself wondering if there was someone else who could train him, and his eyes locked on Berg like, wait, you could be my mentor. He spun toward Berg and demanded answers about long-range magic, convinced that Berg's body-strengthening specialty meant his magic control had to be razor-sharp. Berg snapped with shock. Turns out he couldn't use magic at all, because he had zero talent for it. He explained that he didn't summon fancy effects like traditional magic. He pumped magic power straight through his own body, turning it into raw fuel to supercharge his physical abilities. He finally admitted he had no clue why magic wouldn't work the normal way for him, so he poured every last bit of effort into brute-forcing his body. Owen understood how brutal Berg's life was, being a prince in a magic supremacist country while he couldn't cast a single spell. And when Berg said he'd finally clawed his way through that misery after meeting a legendary teacher, Owen felt it in his bones. Owen swallowed his guilt and apologized for dragging Berg into the mess, but Berg waved it off fast, urging them both to give it everything they had. Meanwhile, the students queued up for the teacher's guidance kept piling in, and the line showed no signs of slowing down. He realized the lesson was already over before he even managed to corner the teacher for advice, and his long-distance magic limit was still stuck at about 50 centimeters, painfully close, yet maddeningly out of reach. Still refusing to quit, he kept training on the field long after the sun vanished, nightfall stretching on while he pushed through. He realized that his memories from another world didn't just change his mind, they shattered this world's rules and let him see magic for what it really was, pure imagination. He folded into a meditative pose, locked onto the thought that if he could finally master this approach, he could pull off something incredible again, just like the day he first invented flight matches. He pictured a beast of pure terror, a legendary blade in its face, and a wave of confidence hit him hard. Maybe his own strange magic style, mixing his grind with game know-how, was finally going to pay off. His eyes lit up with pure excitement and unshakable determination as he locked onto that growing idea like it was destiny. Moments later, he tilted his head to the night sky, triumph blazing on his face, and shouted that something deep had just clicked. And yeah, magic was actually amazing. Far off, the teacher watched him closely, eyes thoughtful and sharp. A whole month had vanished since the entrance ceremony, and now their teacher stood in front of the class and declared that the martial tournament would kick off this very week. This tournament, run by the school for one big showdown, would throw students against their own classmates in magical battles, pushing their skills to the limit and forcing them to prove how tough they really were. Back in the classroom, the teacher leaned in and told everyone she'd already picked the participants, because the elementary education department's event was a team battle, and it would be first-year students from their class stepping up to represent their Then she started calling the picked students, first Bird, who flashed a confident smile, and then Natalie, who met her with a soft, gentle grin. Finally, she called out Owen's name, and he snapped into a shocked gasp like he'd just been hit with lightning. He was completely rattled, wondering why he got picked, while still getting why the other two were chosen too. From the back of the classroom, Chris, one of the students, snapped to her feet, slammed her palm on her desk, and yelled at the teacher that she would not accept that choice. Still shocked by the announcement, she fired off a furious question. Why would someone like Owen be picked for an event that big? Owen stood right there, completely stunned by her outburst, while Berg watched the whole thing with eyes stretched wide. Her protest kept rolling, blasting straight at the teacher's judgment, until the teacher stayed ice calm, asking softly whether Chris's real objection was really just heartbreak over not getting picked. Chris sputtered and stammered, trying to deny it. Even after she denied it, the teacher admitted Chris might struggle to swallow her call, and with a sharp motion, she cut through the doubts and said they'd go ahead anyway. To settle the whole mess, the teacher declared a mock battle. Win it, and you'd earn your spot at the martial meet. The showdown was between Owen and a kid named Dominic, and the moment the announcement hit, the crowd of students erupted in excited murmurs. With the announcement still hanging in the air, Chris, now calling himself Dominic, stepped up like a storm and swore he'd be the inevitable winner, promising he'd prove himself against the ruinous house pepper. Owen watched his sheer intensity and thought this had already spun way past. Dominic's passion surged as he snapped at Owen to shut up, then even started threatening him, and Owen froze, stunned by the rage, thinking that kind of self-absorbed talk was something he'd learned to avoid, even if he'd used words like that back in his own past. Soon, the students were marched to the elementary education practice field, a walled arena built for contests like this, and the teachers stepped forward to lay out the rules of their mock battle, dead simple. Forward, she pushed one last detail forward. The winner would be whoever her eyes chose, or the moment an opponent threw in the towel. Owen and Dominic squared up face to face, both wearing grim, focused looks as the duel barreled toward them. Once the rules were locked in, the teacher barked, "Begin," and Dominic didn't hesitate. He snapped a flame bullet straight at Owen, but Owen barely had time to react before the fiery shot swelled in midair and barreled toward him right. As Dominic's fiery assault slammed in, Owen snapped up a firewall on pure instinct, and it shoved the attack back hard. Watching it hold, Dominic mentally clocked it. Owen wasn't just surviving, he was formidable, and yeah, they both wielded fire. He weighed his choices and knew the truth. Sure, he had gravity magic, but against this opponent it felt useless, and trying any other spell while he was flying would have been like screaming for the enemy to strike. Dominic noticed Owen's internal fight, maybe even his hesitation, then fired off a direct challenge, daring him to prove what he can do. As Dominic shot his hand out, ready to unleash a brutal spell, he vowed to Owen that he was about to show him what real firepower looks like. With a breathy incantation, Dominic summoned a brutal entity, barking for it to crash down with scorching fury and wipe out his enemy, while Owen stared in stunned disbelief. A colossal, fiery Ifrit tore itself out of the ground, towering over Dominic, its flames roaring higher and higher. Then Dominic flashed a confident grin, pushing the beast to live up to every single expectation. The Ifrit's monstrous shape kept forming, burning brighter with every second, blasting out pure power, and Dominic stood right in front of it like it couldn't touch him. My Dominic, still grinning, fired off the same command to the Ifrit, certain it would do exactly what he wanted, just like always. The Ifrit let out a thunderous roar and barreled toward Dominic's command, its giant body rattling the earth with every step, while Natalie and Berg watched from afar, jaws dropped at the sheer fury of its power. Owen froze in shock at the massive summoned beast and its brutal strike, watching a roaring torrent of dark, fiery energy slam toward him. Then it hit him. This was about to go badly, real fast. Good Dominic clocked Owen's stunned face and instantly worried he'd gone too far, thinking, can Owen even defend himself against an assault that brutal? She shrieked, fighting to keep the summit Ifrit under control, yelling at Owen to move before it killed him. Then she admitted she could barely hold its power in check. Owen, frozen in shock, could only blurt out a confused little sound. Elementals lost control and their raw power detonated, tearing open the ground and blasting shards of ice and rubble everywhere. Moments later, Owen was sprawled out, beaten on the shattered ground, and Dominic loomed over her, her face split between worry and pure exasperation like, "I swear, you totally went too far this time." Still bent over from recovery, Owen admitted to Dominic that he'd gotten carried away during the mock battle, then thanked her nonstop for the instruction, clearly soaking in the lesson she'd drilled into him. His excitement snapped right back as he announced he'd jump into the martial mead, and Dominic couldn't believe it. Right then, a teacher nearby declared Owen Pepper the match winner. Deep down, Owen thought, my school life's still rolling perfectly. The Chronicle's second volume kicks off, and Owen and Natalie are already fired up, racing headfirst into brand new adventures. To cover it, they flip everything into monochrome, and their stubborn, determined faces keep screaming, "Bring it," because the next battles are coming fast. The table of contents lays out what's coming next, teasing bigger twists and pushing their journey forward into the chapters to hit. Chapter 7 begins, showcasing Owen, Natalie, and a new male student, all poised for action. Way out on the horizon, Zansar Academy's silhouette loomed against the cloudy sky, getting ready to fire up its annual martial arts tournament. Tournament day was finally here, and the whole city wrapped around the academy was humming with hype, rooftops stretching forever under a blazing, clear sky. Threading through the crush of the city streets, Natalie and the brand new male student pushed past the crowd, soaking in the non-stop buzz as vendors shouted their prices like they meant it. Owen and Natalie burst into the grand arena, and Owen couldn't believe how electric the whole place felt right as the oath of fair play was announced. Natalie wore a thoughtful look as she told them the whole competition would run for 3 days, and by day 3, with the intermediate and advanced finals, things would be way more intense than the elementary matches from day 2. The teacher wrapped up his opening speech and said that was it. Just then Owen clocked the truth. Their whole role was only the warm-up act. Fireworks burst overhead as a thunderous announcement roared out. The 50-second tournament was officially starting. The tournament kicked off for real, and they wasted no time spelling out the rules. Every student would battle with magic inside the marked arenas. A referee would call the results. Each department ran its own bracket, and for the elementary education department, it was a best-of-3 showdown. Moments later, Owen, Natalie, and Berg were shoved into a waiting room, and Owen clocked the first opponent, a third-year student. Student Natalie flashed a determined look and swore their only path was victory, while Owen, seeing exactly what that meant, admitted it would be brutal if the first years walked in and lost. Berg strutted in, radiating confidence, and swore they'd win for sure, then challenged Owen, asking if he really thought this would be a cakewalk. Owen, still uneasy, pushed him for answers, asking how he could be so sure. Berg just shrugged and said their combined power would make it a non-issue. He kept brushing off the upperclassmen's power, acting like it meant nothing. Still, he couldn't deny the rumor that the student council president was absolutely terrifying. Natalie jumped in, backed Berg, and pressed Owen hard. "Why are you freaking out like that?" She said with iron confidence that everything would be fine because they were strong. But Owen couldn't shake a nagging doubt. The only fights he'd ever really survived were against Katarina-sensei and Dominic, and now he had no clue what he could truly do. He snapped with shock why him, out of all people, was named Taisho, and as his confusion hit a wall, Natalie and Berg cut in, telling him the truth. He was the strongest of the bunch. He quietly claimed his power came from memories of a past life, but Natalie shut him down fast, pointing out that barely any 10-year-old could pull off flight magic like he did, yet he refused to believe that she was right. Even with doubts gnawing at him, he finally caved, grinning like he meant it, promising Berg he'd give it everything as captain. Berg radiated pure confidence and vowed his team would go all in, and Owen couldn't help but notice the way his friend glowed with confidence. Then, right on cue, an announcement blared that the first years had to get ready. The crowd buzzed with restless anticipation as the call for the simpos rang out. Everyone craned forward for the vanguard, the very first to step up. With a steely glare, Berg declared he'd win for sure. Then he charged down the steps toward the arena as Owen and Natalie shouted encouragement, pushing him forward with every cheer. He stood poised in the arena, confident grin set in place, ready to launch his match as the team's senpo. With a snap of pure momentum, Berg seized the win and launched his opponent flying through the air right as the announcer slammed the result. "Berg is the winner." Owen fired up, telling Natalie to bring her A-game because the stakes were sky-high, and Natalie nodded back like, "Yeah, this is my time to step into the fight." Natalie, now officially the team's Chu Ken, guarding the middle, stepped onto the arena floor with a steel-straight stare, locked in and ready to rip into her own match. She planted her feet on the arena floor, and the crowd's roar kept climbing as the second match was seconds away, swallowing the whole place in pure noise, and somehow she thrived in it. Down on the sidelines, Owen watched, soaking in the crowd's wild, electrifying energy. As the match kicked off, Owen and Bird leaned in and started talking. Bird proudly said the Adelheid family was built on lightning magic, and honestly, it's one of the deadliest powers around. Natalie didn't waste a second either. She flooded the battlefield with a relentless blast of lightning, scorching every chance her opponent had to fight back. She kept hammering forward, blasting a blazing lightning spear that slammed into her opponent with brutal force, and a sharp cry of pain tore through the air. The moment the match was sealed, the referee called Natalie Adelheid the winner, and she simply nodded with a courteous "thank you." Right beside her, Owen and Bird erupted in cheers, praising her for that lightning-fast victory. Owen stared at the results, and suddenly the truth hit. If Berg and Natalie had both won, the first-class team would have already clinched victory, and the realization landed like a lightning bolt. Natalie stepped up and told him to take a breather, but frustration ate him alive. He'd never even gotten a single turn to fight. Then the next matches rolled in, and Berg and Natalie steamrolled their opponents, locking in Year One's victory for good, while Owen just stood there looking crushed, his dreams of stepping into the action finally shattered. He stood there alone, crushed by the feeling that he was just dead weight doing nothing while everyone else moved. So if he only won without lifting a finger, was he truly useless? Natalie then blurted that she planned to watch the second-year matches next, grilled Berg about what he was doing, and swung over to Owen, telling him their matches for the day were done and pushing lunch right then. Owen stared up, stunned. While they walked, Owen leaned over and asked Natalie if her parents had come to watch her fight. She shook her head and said they were swamped. Then Owen's mind flipped to his own parents, always buried in something, and he decided he'd worry about it after he finally ate. He caught himself staring back at his old life, especially his parents, always showing up for every one of his events. Then regret hit hard, and he silently begged forgiveness for dying, even though the whole story behind it had already turned into a fuzzy blur. Natalie's voice cut through his thoughts as she asked if something was wrong, and he brushed off her worry on the spot, agreeing with Chris that they should keep moving forward. As they moved through the scene, they caught the chaos of the crowd. Natalie couldn't believe how packed it was, and Chris pointed out the buzz swirling around the first-year students this time. Right there, the other students were already buzzing about the first years, one guy bragging about Berg's insane skill, and a girl gushing that Natalie was just too adorable. Then the talk quickly shifted to the third prince and the Duchess. He caught every word of their conversation, whirled around to Chris, who'd heard it too, and Chris started wondering, can we really win the championship? Then immediately hesitated because they couldn't possibly beat the one person everyone was talking about. Student Council President. Then she broke down the tournament game plan, explaining that the president, probably sneering at their Taishu as a joke, would likely throw down against their Senpo or Chukin to stop them from stealing the win again. His internal thoughts got cut off when he realized the incompetent Pepper guy rumors Chris was talking about weren't rumors at all, they were him, and pure shock hit him like a punch. The other students kept hurling their cruel comments, praying Chris would snap once he finally lost, calling it the perfect wake-up call, until Chris heard it and demanded they stop. Without warning, Natalie, who'd been eavesdropping, blew up in rage, slammed the two students for talking nonsense, and shouted Owen's name at the top of her lungs. Then she dropped the truth, "I'm Natalie Adelheid," and the two gossiping students froze, staring in shock as doubt clawed at her words. She clung to Owen and begged like her life depended on it, "I just know it." And the shock hit Owen as she insisted he could win the whole tournament by himself. Caught off guard, Owen only managed a confused gasp before she snapped, "We're leaving," and pulled him along with her. As she turned and started walking off, Owen hurried after her, trying to figure out what had hurt her, and he asked, "Are you mad about what I said earlier?" She snapped back, "No, I'm not angry, I'm sick of the horrible things people keep saying about it." Frustration crushed her from the inside, tears spilled as she clapped a hand over her mouth, and she couldn't find the words to even explain how she felt. When he saw her tears, Owen felt the truth hit like lightning. She was crying for him. He held her gaze for a second, then a steely spark flared in his eyes. "For the final match," he said, "I'm taking down the student council president myself." Owen, surrounded by students and teachers, walked right up to Natalie and dared her to let him take on the student council president, leaving Natalie staring at him in stunned disbelief. With that fierce glint in her eyes, she demanded one thing: she made him swear he'd win the fight. With Natalie's voice still ringing in his ears, Owen planted his stance and summoned a glowing energy orb in his hand, standing shoulder to shoulder with a senior student who looked just as ready to smash head-on into what was coming. Later, in the waiting room, the senior student nodded and gave his word, saying he honestly thought Owen should be the one to confront the president. He explained that this whole situation bothered him too, and Owen immediately agreed, then went on to call the senior student a genuinely good person. Owen still had doubts, but the senior student leaned in and said there was a real chance the president would go for a Chu-Kin match against Natalie this time, and if last year was any clue, the president would target the other team's toughest players right out of the gate. Then he leaned in and warned Owen, because even he wasn't sure he could take down the president. Owen's face tightened with worry as the news hit him, and he realized the student council president was rumored to be the strongest of the strongest. He whirled on the senior student and demanded, "So the president's really that terrifying?" Then reminded him he'd seen the last match with his own eyes. A senior student vouched for the president and flat out revealed he's a wind magic user, then immediately admitted he didn't think Owen's flames would stand a chance against wind that strong. He wrestled with the fight ahead and realized the student council president left him zero room to breathe, no cracks in the power of his attacks, and not a single weakness in his defenses. The senior student kept going, telling him the president could shield himself with a huge, all-range defensive wall, one that could blast back or even sweep away every regular spell. His offense was just as unreal. He slammed opponents with high-powered magic nonstop, never giving them an inch of breathing room, while another student got completely overwhelmed right on cue. Owen froze with a stunned look, his mind screaming that it wasn't fair for someone to be that strong, until the senior student said, "Because of his massive experience, the president can shut down most magic and his judgment is razor-sharp. He's a terrifying opponent." The senior student locked onto the only way they could win. If they could somehow trick the president into underestimating his opponent, then maybe they had a shot, because once he got momentum, he'd be unstoppable. Owen admitted that a surprise strike felt like the smartest move, but he instantly worried he wouldn't be able to bulk up fast enough, until the senior student told him to pump himself up as hard as he could, then slam in with a lightning-quick ambush. Later, Natalie slid up to Owen, and you could still see the worry sitting heavy on his face. She teased him about his promise to win, then immediately calmed him down. If he lost, she'd be right there, cheering him on. He muttered back, and Natalie burst into a laugh, telling him she was just teasing. Then she slapped him with one serious demand: lock in the win. Owen headed back into their chat and flat out told the senior student, "Yeah, I don't think I can beat the president the normal way." The senior student nodded hard, saying they needed a real, solid plan, no guessing. As the sun sank, Owen stood in front of a massive arena, staring at his next move. He decided he'd map out everything he could do before tomorrow, then turned to the senior student and begged for tips to toughen his body up in the meantime. The very next day, Berg's first match ended with a decisive written call that crowned him the winner and knocked him sprawled on the ground, gasping from pure exhaustion, while Owen watched from the sidelines, his own match about to explode next. He leaned in for the next match, clocking how his opponent stayed ice calm while unleashing real, terrifying power. Seconds later, the announcer's voice roared as the next fighter was announced, first-year Owen Pepper, and the crowd exploded with boos and jeers like a tidal wave. The crowd kept waving off Owen, calling him a weakling and chanting that the match would be a snooze, until the announcer cut in and threw down Kaizev Standard, a third year and the ruthless student council president. Owen's jaw dropped when Kaizev got flooded with cheers and non-stop encouragement, with people chanting for him not to hold back even once as a first year. Kaizev then turned straight to Owen, stunned that the Chu-Kin bout wasn't facing Natalie. Then he admitted he'd been outplayed, leaving Owen scrambling to figure out what he meant. He finally admitted it, he'd been outplayed, plain and simple. Kaizev had been so sure that once he crushed Natalie, the rest of the game would fall into his hands like a guaranteed win. Owen clenched his fist, shooting a silent, blazing protest at Kaizev's claim that he was doing it on purpose. He didn't fully trust his own power, but he knew Natalie was banking everything on it. Kaizev shot Owen a smug grin and told him to chill, but Owen's gaze burned with pure resolve as he snapped that he'd go all out and hit with everything he had. He geared up for the elementary education department finals by hardening his legs, then his light-haired opponent shot back fast, whipping up wind magic and hurling razor blades of air. He didn't hesitate, he grabbed his opening and blasted a non-stop storm of fireballs, but his opponent snapped back fast, summoning a roaring wind vortex that shoved every last flame aside. Stunned by how fast his opponent flipped from attack to defense, he knew this fight wasn't going to be easy. Yet even with victory slipping through his fingers, he clenched his resolve, refused to quit, and ready to spell so much stronger it was about to change everything. With a fierce shout he called forth Ifrit, an enormous, roaring blaze beast that slammed into the arena floor, bursting with terrifying power. Natalie, Chris, and Bird, along with everyone else, just stared in stunned silence, their minds racing as they wondered what kind of monster-level magic could possibly pull off something like that. Natalie and Chris traded smiles, both of them looking genuinely blown away by his performance. His opponent froze in shock, staring at that blazing magical surge and realizing, instantly, just how terrifyingly powerful it was. He stared into the spiraling inferno and realized the shortened chant had weakened the spell, but it was still the strongest magic he could throw right now, so he held his breath, wondering if his attack actually worked. From the raging flames, his opponent burst out, totally unscathed, and came charging in with a furious blade strike, attack built to cut through absolutely anything. He screamed in agony the second the attack slammed into him. He screamed as the attack slammed into him, and shock rocked his body until he could barely move, injured, stunned, and broken. From the sidelines, Natalie stared in horror, crying out his name with a voice trembling on the edge of panic. Standing over him, his opponent stared him down and finally admitted Owen's strength, even apologizing for ever underestimating him. With the fight still raging, Owen got slammed into a violent whirl of wind, his opponent's unbreakable barrier, so Owen clenched his teeth and realized this wasn't just a battle, it was a statement. Owen's eyes flashed with determination as he vowed to unleash his full power from this moment on, then a swirling vortex of energy tore open right beneath his feet. The vortex he summoned exploded outward, ballooning into a gigantic, rampaging whirlwind that ripped straight through the arena. Suddenly, those brutal winds snapped against him, catching him totally off guard. He staggered and cried out as sharp blades of air battered his body. Meanwhile, Natalie and Chris watched with mounting dread as Owen fought for his life. Those ruthless wind blades kept chasing him, and the non-stop pressure made it impossible for him to trigger his own magic. Even while the attacks kept hammering him, he refused to fold, because weak, half-hearted magic wouldn't save anyone. With a fierce, almost sinister stare, he bared his intent and summoned his most brutal fire magic, calling the Ifrit to torch his enemy with flames straight out of hell. Yet when Ifrit's colossal magical blast finally detonated, the wind blades didn't even flinch, just kept hanging there, untouched. Owen gawked in total disbelief because the strongest magic he had was supposed to end this, and it landed with zero effect. The relentless wind kept battering him, hurling him backward again and again as he screamed in agony. Watching Owen fight with everything he had, his opponent only smirked and said, "If you can't do anything, then just quit." Then he leaned in with a cold truth. Owen wasn't experienced enough, and sure, he'd expected more from a mage, but in the end he was still just a first-year student. Real magic, the opponent insisted, didn't come from raw talent alone, it came from years of experience, earned step by step. Those crushing gusts kept slamming Owen around like a pinball, and dark blood sprayed from his wounds as Natalie, Chris, and Bird below watched in stunned horror, terror screaming across their faces. That terrifying whirlwind wouldn't let up, tearing everything apart without mercy. Natalie's voice shook as she blurted out, "Is Owen going to die?" And Chris frantically begged someone to stop the brutal assault before it was too late. As Owen kept getting hammered without mercy, Natalie snapped and blurted out that she couldn't watch anymore, lunging forward, only for another student to clamp onto her and admit, with grim certainty, that their opponent's power was crushingly overwhelming. He grabbed her and held her back, telling her Owen had sworn he wouldn't go down, no matter how grim it got. Natalie, still shaken, snapped her gaze to Owen, and when she saw that fierce fire in his eyes, she knew it, he hadn't given up. Right as she finished speaking, a brutal punch slammed into Owen and sent him stumbling backward again, making Natalie shriek his name in raw, helpless anguish. Even after impact, Owen stayed pinned inside the whirling wind barrier, panic hammering his mind. He remembered Natalie's warning, "Don't you dare quit," that would be pathetic, and now he stared down one brutal truth. He had to find a way through this towering typhoon of wind. Then it hit him, wait, a typhoon. It hit him like a bolt. If this really was a typhoon, then it had to have an eye, a quiet core where the storm calms down, and that was his one shot, do or die. With pure desperation fueling his resolve, he slammed his hand down and unleashed a gravity release spell. Then, just like that, his body fought the wind and shot upward into the sky. Down below, his friends stared in shock, yelling Owen's name, totally stunned, and asking how on earth he was even flying. The student who'd restrained Natalie earlier shot his head up, stunned out of his mind. He recognized the wind magic Owen had shown in class, but he swore it couldn't work against a current this vicious, and Natalie and Chris mirrored the shock. As Owen hung in midair, his friends just gawked, then one scary thought hit them. Was this the legendary flight magic they'd always heard about? He double-checked what he'd seen before, then watched the wind barrier whirl around Kaizef, clearing the air right above him, and just like that, he had the perfect opening. With a jolt that slammed power into his body, he kicked the gravity loose and dropped into a free fall from way above, straight out of the sky and right onto Kaizef, who had zero time to react. Owen slammed Kaizef with a brutal iron fist punch, driving a clean hit into him. Kaizef staggered back, wondering if that was some kind of taijutsu. Natalie and Chris stared in shock, shouting that this fight wasn't even close to ending, because Owen had already shattered the wind barrier. Kaizef, shaking himself off, spat that the disruption wrecked his wind magic, then tried to launch another spell, but Owen snapped back that he wouldn't let it happen. Owen didn't stop. He smashed Kaizef again and again, and as he drove the hits, Natalie's training words snapped back into his head. Taijutsu was all about watching your opponent, then striking the moment their guard slips, especially when they're too busy protecting their upper body. When Kaizef tried casting magic again, Owen snapped back to the lesson and swore he'd go for the low target, then launched a fast kick. Chris's voice kept banging inside his head. This was the core anti-magic taijutsu move, the one built to fight back through timing, not luck. He told Owen to track the enemy's hand and bail out of the way, because if you lost your balance, you'd never be able to zero in your shot. In the present, Owen didn't slow down. He smashed Kaizef over and over with a ruthless close-quarters barrage. Kaizef was caught off guard, and even as a first-year, he had to admit Owen clearly trained hard with his mentors. Owen smashed out another brutal iron fist punch, landing it clean on Kaizef, and in that moment he knew his training wasn't just magic. He could still feel those savage taijutsu sessions with Natalie and Chris. Suddenly, Kaizef maxed out and pushed past his breaking point, started flooding the air with raw magical power, lining up to hurl a brutal colossal fireball spell. Kaizef's towering presence loomed over Owen as he lay there, beaten and gasping, trying and failing to push himself up, while Natalie and Chris watched from the sidelines with panic rising in their faces, shouting at him to stay down because they feared one more move would wreck him. He crumpled against a wall split wide open, the last attack still roaring through his bones. Then a booming voice snapped across the arena and announced the winner. Suddenly, Natalie and Chris launched into a full-on celebratory hug, their faces glowing with pure joy, while the announcer kept booming out the shocking results. And the winner is Owen Pepper. Then, for the elementary education department, the winning team is the first-year team. Owen Pepper stood there stunned, barely able to let out a weak, pained little sound. His friends kept roaring out their congratulations, while up in the stands other students muttered, stunned and not believing their eyes. Of course he got picked, one blurted, and another chimed in. Pepper was absolutely incredible, right? But then one student's face twisted with pure fury. He clenched his fist and seethed because it should have been him, not Owen Pepper, standing up victorious. Inside that grand building, a brutal inner war tore through their souls, one voice screaming the beast couldn't be contained anymore, the other snapping in agreement, finally breaking under the pressure. That whole internal storm seemed to trace back to a young woman, Natalie, who went beet red with embarrassment, begging Owen to please stop acting so brazen right in front of everyone. Owen, just as shaken, grabbed Natalie's attention and begged for one tiny moment, insisting the very tip would be fine, his face twisted in pure desperation. He brushed off her pleas, tore into the food like it was going to vanish, and blurted how amazing it tasted. Because after that brutal magical battle, his body felt like it was starving to death, so he figured he'd eat everything he could, even with Natalie warning him that overdoing it would give him a stomachache. While he kept chewing, a young woman with dark red hair slid up behind him and made him whip around. Then he snapped at her to back off because he was trying to enjoy his meal in peace. She insisted she wasn't trying to start drama, she just wanted to talk. Then she made it clear that victory celebration wasn't only about stuffing your face, it was about networking and rubbing shoulders with the powerful kids from other schools. Still, he stayed locked on his food, saying he'd love to meet them, right after he finished eating. No matter what she tried, he just couldn't kick off a conversation. He stayed locked onto his food while everyone else, students and faculty alike, mingled all around him. Suddenly, a tall, elegant guy with long blonde hair, Natalie instantly knew him as Chris Senpai, strode up and pointed out all the racket, then turned to Owen, who looked genuinely shocked, and asked if he'd finally become a teacher at Central. In this world, there were 4 big magic academies: Zansar, where Owen was enrolled right now, Central, Waltz, and Heron Matter, and they didn't just sit back. They traded ideas, pushed each other to get better, and even had teachers from the other schools slipping in to watch what went down. Ren flashed a knowing grin and hailed Pepper's legendary magic, remembering their stunning finals comeback. Then Chris cut in fast, brushing off the importance of flight magic. Then he leaned in close to Owen, eyes sharpening as he demanded to know straight up whether Owen was into witches too. Owen jerked back hard, clearly shocked by how close he got and how creepy that question hit. Chris watched it all unfold and snapped out a sharp warning, telling Ren he was getting way too close and demanding to know if he was trying to poach her student. Ren played dumb and shot up his hands like, "Whoa, what, me?" He casually fixed his hair, admitting he was into Pepper, then smirked and claimed he had top-tier students of his own. With a careless flick of his hand, he barked, "You introduce yourself," and Chris and Owen just traded baffled looks like, "Wait, who is he talking to?" A timid young boy pushed forward and with shaky courage introduced himself as Thor, just a first-year student. Ren beamed proudly and said that even with all that shyness, Thor's talent was impossible to deny. Chris sensed something worse lurking in the air, like bloodlust pouring off that boy, while Ren just smirked, completely calm, saying he'd known Zansar would be far more capable than this and ready to square up with the intermediate education department. Owen felt the fury rolling off Thor, so he pressed Chris for the real deal, because Thor wasn't even trying to hide how much he hated him. Then Ren cut in, announced they were leaving, and told Thor to come after him. As they walked off, Chris leaned in and told Owen that Thor used to be nothing but sweet, always trailing her and Katarina during their senior days at Zansar, until one brutal incident from long ago flipped something inside him, and ever since he's been acting way too strange. Then she snapped her gaze to Owen and warned him, "Think before you act, because every move you make can hit other people hard." Owen swallowed her words and nodded, taking her warning to heart. He jerked his gaze upward, eyes wide, when a voice snapped the question like, "Are you deaf?" Then Chris admitted she'd been peeking into his life long before he even enrolled, and it burned Owen with embarrassment, because she slid in that she and Katarina used to be rivals. They'd been locked in a non-stop battle for the top spot, pushing each other to get better every single day, and Owen couldn't believe it since he had no idea his teachers were former classmates. Owen puffed up with pride and bragged that Katarina-sensei was a genius, but Chris cut in fast. Katarina was the only one who could keep outdoing her over and over in magic. Chris pictured Katarina in his head, and right then she snapped at Owen, accusing him of having inappropriate thoughts, before drilling it into him to stop wasting his free time on stupid ideas and go mingle with everyone instead. He got stuck on the idea of mixing in, groaning because every time he tried to socialize in this new world, it felt brutally hard, and he couldn't even figure out what he'd say to a stranger, so part of him just wanted to slip into a corner and vanish. Right when he was stuck replaying his social disaster, a bright, cheerful girl swept up to him, "I'm Monet," and confessed she was a massive fan of his martial arts tournament performance, leaving Owen staring in stunned disbelief at the sudden attention. Monet practically beamed as she told him she'd been trying to talk to him for ages, and now that he'd gone and smashed that annoying bastard, she finally felt like she could breathe. Owen stumbled over her words as Kaizef strolled in and casually greeted Monet, and the moment she mentioned beating someone in the finals, Owen snapped. Monet was talking about him, and he blurted out, "So, are you calling me an annoying bastard?" Monet brushed Owen aside, snapped that Kaizef was still ice cold, and that looking at his face made her want to swing on him, while Kaizef just stayed completely unfazed and acknowledged she was there. She kept tearing into him, screaming that just his presence made her furious and that she'd never once lost to him. Kaizef just smirked, calm as ever, and said maybe it was because she was always the one losing him. With a tiny smirk, he pointed out how close Monet and Owen seemed. Then Monet snapped back instantly, swearing they weren't close at all. Monet kept doubling down on her denial, insisting they were enemies, so Kaizef just shrugged, saying they weren't foes at all but friends and spirits, and then dug up their past. Classmates in another school, clicking immediately as first years, where their bond was exactly that. Owen watched the whole exchange and his stomach sank. Kaizef had a rival who kept snapping back at him nonstop, and somehow Owen felt like he'd lived that kind of drama before. He slammed the whole idea down, waving his hands and shaking his head like it was absurd, because in his eyes, Kaizef doesn't see a rival, Kaizef sees an enemy. While Monet kept the conversation going, she suddenly said Kaizef had a brother, same hair color, same central uniform look, and so painfully shy, and Owen's jaw dropped as he blurted, "Wait, you mean his brother?" Monet jabbed a finger straight at Owen and snapped, "You were the one talking to my brother earlier," and that hit Owen like a lightning bolt of pure understanding. Monet leaned in and told Owen she truly hoped he'd get along with her brother, and even as the news was still sinking in, Owen insisted, "He's a nice kid," even though he could barely recall their quick meet and barely talked to him in the first place. Monet shot Owen a furious look and yelled for him to shut it, still going on about how eerily close she and her brother seemed. Owen suddenly grabbed his stomach, a sharp stab of pain snapping through him, and he couldn't help but wonder, did he really eat too much? Still clutching his stomach, Owen blurted an apology and slipped away, saying he had to hit the bathroom and leave the youngsters be. Monet, shocked by his sudden exit, snapped, "Wait." He sprinted through the strange halls, panic twisting his gut. This wasn't the elementary building, and he had zero clue where the bathroom was. Crap, this was going to be a disaster. Then it hit him, why not just ask someone? He froze mid-step, caught voices drifting from the corner, and couldn't stop himself from wondering who they were. He tiptoed around the corner and spotted Ren talking fast in an urgent tone. Then it hit him. The teacher was there too, and this didn't look like a normal chat. As he bolted away, he slammed into another student, and the impact jolted them both. The impact slammed into him, ripping the stomach pain wide open, and he gasped in agony. Now he knew he couldn't hold it much longer before everything spilled. He cursed his damn luck. That calm young student he accidentally ran into just motioned him to the bathroom, right around the corner, and Owen's shoulders finally dropped. He rushed in, apologized again and again, and thanked him like crazy, barely slipping in on time. The other student let out a breath too, admitting he'd been stuck in the exact same nightmare once. After Owen finally got relief, he burst out, thanking the student over and over, then bolted away as if he could outrun the embarrassment, and the student just watched him leave with a sly, knowing smirk. Still grinning, the student muttered to himself, wondering if Owen had some hidden motive, and honestly shocked that Owen had managed to win the fight going on inside his head. Owen, still rattled from everything that just happened, kept sprinting while that sharp-eyed student tracked him and thought, no matter why you're like this, you're definitely something special. Owen flew through the door, relief crashing over his face. He'd made it to the toilet just in time. He replayed how the first-year martial arts tournament finally wrapped up, realizing his reputation had bumped up just a notch while that brutal stomachache still burned in his mind like it happened seconds ago. A few days after the tournament ended, Owen, anicap to Minnie, slid right back into student life, riding the hype of his jaw-dropping win over the student council president as his classmates showered him with praise, even if the spotlight still made him feel awkward. Then, as he headed down the hall, Natalie stepped in front of him. He grinned and told Natalie he just cooked up a brand new magic spell after winning the tournament, begging for her thoughts. Then she stared back with zero excitement. He clocked her weirdly uncharacteristic expression and blurted her name, his voice laced with real concern. She whipped around, irritation blazing across her face, and snapped that he should go impress someone else, like he suddenly had a whole buffet of options, and he just stood there, stunned and totally lost. The story spills into an outdoor classroom right as the lesson is about to kick off, diving straight into the terrifying world of demons and the power of magic stones. Teacher Squad, the headmaster, kicked off the lesson by slamming home that demons are vicious, magical monsters that hunt people. Then he scanned the room and asked, "Who's ever heard of them?" After the silence stretched, he leaned in and demanded, "So, how do demons even get born?" Then he called on Natalie, and just like that, she and another student shot their hands up, ready to answer. She told him that magic stones soak up miasma until they cloud over and turn chalky white, and if it keeps going long enough, a demon finally hatches, with that tainted stone acting like its beating core. The headmaster raved that Natalie's answer was spot on, then explained it happens a lot with low-purity magic stones. Owen watched from nearby and couldn't help but gush about how cool Natalie was, even while comparing himself like Pepper, less important in his own eyes. He kept on lecturing, laying it out, magic stones don't just store spell energy, they power magical tools too, and when a mage's mana hits rock bottom, they're the lifesaver that refills it in a pinch. So yeah, he made everyone pay attention, because one mistake out there could spell danger fast. Owen clocked the pensive look on Natalie's face and asked what was going on, and she told him that monster slaying was usually for third years, but noble blood came with a duty to hunt demons, and they had to keep that truth burned into their minds. Right then, Owen clocked the headmaster standing with Chris, and his stomach dropped as he wondered why 3 teachers were there at what he thought was Squad Sensei's lecture. Chris flashed a huge grin and spilled the real reason they met. This was practice for demon slaying, and they were starting right now. Then Owen blurted out a stunned, "Can't believe this" gasp. Still reeling from the shocking news, Owen shot back at Chris, insisting they were only first years and that demon slaying was a third-year thing, and they'd just been told that. Chris only scoffed, basically brushing it off like she had zero plans to do anything so normal. Chris kept talking, laying out her reason point-blank. Waiting until their third year would be way too late since the academy's kids were getting weaker every term, so they decided right now to start acclimating them to demons. Owen stared hard, opened his mouth in shock, then his face twisted into pure dismay as the truth hit him, and he snapped that it was all completely absurd. He blurted out whether Rin Sensei's taunts at the victory celebration pushed him into this crazy decision, and then Rin shot back, loud and firm, denying it on the spot with a confident smile. Natalie and Katarina were still reeling when the headmaster finally stepped forward, swallowed his pride, and apologized, then straight up admitted he'd proposed the whole plan, sure the team that fought just yesterday had the muscle to survive it. Owen stared in disbelief, completely stunned by what he'd just heard. Owen clenched his fists in frustration, but the headmaster cut in fast, praising him and declaring he was way more capable than any average third year. The headmaster hammered home the truth. He'd personally pitched that accelerated training plan to Chris Sensei, and Owen, blindsided, could only stammer back. Owen was still reeling from the headmaster's announcement when Chris, looking oddly satisfied, cut in and said it was time to reveal the team formations for the demon slaying practice. As she pushed on, Chris dropped the breakdown. Team A would follow Owen, Team B would be led by Natalie, Team C by Berg, and Team D by Morris Sensei. Then the second Owen heard his name paired with Natalie's, his face crumpled with instant dread while the rest of the students snapped to attention, shocked. His stomach dropped when he found out he'd been paired with Dominic, a hot-headed menace who snapped off his complaints the second the assignment hit the table. Then Farron, cool as ice, calmly introduced herself and said she couldn't wait to team up. And right after that, Amelia stepped in with a polite smile and a courteous hello. Owen tried to slam down his authority and stop the team's morale from crashing, so he shouted that he was the leader, but Dominic barely blinked, and Farron and Amelia just stared like it didn't mean a thing. Chris laid out the practice rules fast. Every team got its own zone to exterminate demons. Then she handed them a magical tool and told them to call for a teacher the moment things got dangerous, saying they'd be totally fine as long as they didn't wander too far. Mori-sensei barked the instructions, then sent the students packing straight into the forest as they sprinted off to start their demon-slaying practice. Dominic, all impatient fire, didn't waste a second. He barreled forward, crashed into a tiny demon, screamed in rage, and blasted it away with a wave of magic. Owen, Farron, and Amelia showed up moments later and stared as Dominic stormed in. All rage and force, Owen muttered that nothing about him had changed, and Farron snapped that he needed to slow down. But Dominic shoved right past them, yelling he didn't care, demanding they hurry up, even as Amelia warned that this kind of move could get them killed. Owen, still trying to figure out his new teammates, couldn't stop thinking about how powerful they were, especially her, the one everyone feared for holy magic, because with a crew this wild and unpredictable, he knew they were walking straight into some serious trouble. Lauren overheard Owen's thoughts, snapped her head toward him with wide-eyed shock, and blurted that she'd heard he used to be just like Dominic. Baron kept going, saying that at one point Owen flipped the script on his whole life and turned into a genuinely good person, and she admitted she'd only ever heard nasty rumors about him after he joined Xansar, how he used to be treacherous, villainous, shameless, and rude as hell. Owen just chuckled because he knew that dark past was all true. He pressed her for what she meant by his transformation, insisting it was just discipline from a great teacher. Then he started staring inward at himself. Farron watched him closely and only nodded, accepting his answer. As she talked, Farron's face finally melted and she reached up to rub her own arm like, "I get it," showing she'd lived through the same kind of pain. Her mind spiraled back to the days when her body and soul were wrecked, years spent wandering through darkness, with zero hope to light the way. Then right out of the darkness, a hand shot toward her, yanking her up from the crushing despair. Back in the present, Farn told Owen that her teacher had been pure from the start, never once getting lost, and Owen's teacher admitted she'd always wanted to be just like her, desperately reshaping herself to make it happen, and Owen couldn't believe her confession. The words hit like something truly incredible. Owen then blurted out that he respected his teacher more than anything, calling her a truly great mage, and that's exactly why he signed up for this school. He wanted to become an amazing mage just like her. Erin heard him out and totally got where he was coming from. She tilted her head and demanded he spell it out. What did he mean by an amazing mage? Was it her raw skill or her deep knowledge of magic? Owen stammered, completely thrown, like he couldn't find the right words. Owen realized his words might have sounded wrong, so he blurted out a quick apology, swearing he wasn't trying to mock his teacher at all. Then he caught himself thinking he'd never really bothered to ask, and once he actually faced it straight, he realized he had no clue what kind of mage he wanted to be. He kept wrestling with what kind of mage he wanted to become, craving the power to match Katarina, yet admitting that his dream was still foggy, with no clear shape or answer in sight. Suddenly, a voice from off-panel snapped him out of his thoughts and told him to stop, and when he looked up, he realized he needed to dig deeper into what he really wanted. Lauren flashed him a warm smile and promised she'd be in his corner, rooting for him all the way. Then he finally answered with a hesitant, quiet nod. Meanwhile, across the way, Natalie fought to hold Dominic back as he lunged forward, panicking that he'd break the rules. This was only a training exercise to get used to demons, not a hunt for the strongest. Dominic snapped back that a real demon could be waiting up ahead, and he demanded Natalie let him go. Natalie strained to keep him from slipping away, and when Dominic tried to dart toward the back, she blurted out that something was seriously off, like, what on earth was going on? When Owen and Farn finally showed up, he barked at Dominic to stop that reckless stunt, prove you've got what it takes to lead. Dominic snapped his jaw shut, and you could tell fury was burning hot. Dominic's face twisted with rage as he snapped at Owen to shut up, screaming that Owen had no right to boss him around. Then Dominic stormed into the thick foliage, vanishing and leaving the rest behind. Natalie, visibly shaken, let out a shaky, unsure murmur, while Owen watched Dominic storm off recklessly and resigned himself to chasing after him. Then Farron declared she'd tag along too. As they trailed behind, Natalie's unease hit hard. She couldn't even explain why, but her gut screamed that something was terribly wrong, and Owen just stared, baffled by how sudden her fear was. A few heartbeats later, a hulking, muscular boar-like demon with vicious tusks ripped out of the brush, shocking Owen and Farron to the bone. Owen went wide-eyed with pure terror, while Dominic lurked in the back like the one who just poked the beast and set it loose. Chapter 12 begins with Owen and Natalie encountering a monstrous, pig-faced demon in the forest, its sheer size dwarfing them. They gawked in pure disbelief. This thing's massive bulk and brutal hide were impossible to miss. It was an orc, the kind that usually takes several mages to knock down, but this one dwarfed them all, screaming that it wasn't just any brute, it was a far more powerful variant. The colossal beast erupted in a guttural growl, and fear hit them like a punch. This wasn't just any monster, it was a high orc all along, while, unbeknownst to them, a cloaked figure lingered in the distance with a faint, knowing smile curling across their lips. The hooded observer replayed the headmaster's words. He'd already set a magic stone packed with concentrated miasma, all to summon a raging high orc, and he couldn't stop thinking about Owen Pepper, the one who supposedly used witchcraft magic, so he had to wonder what Owen would do the moment that monster came knocking. The cloaked figure kept staring into the dark, realizing they'd need an elite crew of knights and mages just to survive that kind of monster. Then they couldn't help but wonder, if Owen could pull off even more kinds of witchcraft, wouldn't they be dying to see it? Natalie suddenly shrieked, slamming Owen with a warning to keep his voice down or the orcs would zero in, and before they could react, the hulking high orc blasted a massive fireball straight at them, forcing Owen to scramble and dodge the exploding blast at the last second. He slammed down hard, crushed by the high orc's attack and the crushing weight of the demon's power, so intense it left him reeling, stunned for a heartbeat. Natalie watched Owen back off and blurted in total shock, asking why he was fleeing instead of calling a teacher with a magic tool, while the hooded figure just kept staring, calling Owen's current target pathetic, even as it made everything easier for them. Even after his earlier retreat, Owen snapped back fast. He hurled a huge fireball and slammed the high orc with a violent burst of magic. Then he fired up body-strengthening magic, his outline sharpening like it was carved from light, and he snapped urgently that Natalie had to get out of there. Natalie and the hooded observer just stared, shocked by Owen's sudden power surge and the command he threw at them. Still shaken from that brutal encounter, Owen bolted away from the High Orc, yanking Natalie with him as he sprinted to safety, because he knew he had to put real distance between them and that terrifying demon. As they climbed higher, he snapped gravitational release and launched a spell that let them break free from gravity itself. Natalie blinked in shock, then she realized the air was holding them up, floating on Owen's one-of-a-kind flight magic. Beneath her, the High Orc rumbled out a nasty, low growl. Natalie and Farron, another student, shot a fearful glance back at the charging High Orc, but Owen was already fighting for breath, realizing 2 extra bodies had piled on his speed and nearly trapped him in place. With a High Orc charging in undeterred, he swung a massive club like a battering ram, and Owen, unable to slip out in time, blurted to Farron and Amelia in a panic. Warren snapped back that he got it, then told Amelia to block the incoming strike, but Owen cut in that he couldn't summon any other magic while they were still keeping flight. The High Orc kept growling like a nightmare as Farron ripped out a blade of wind, and Amelia followed up with a spear of light, then both spells slammed straight into the demon. The High Orc bellowed in agony when the hits landed, but Owen and the 3 students stayed floating in the air, staring down at the battered beast. Suddenly, Owen screamed in panic as his magic slipped out of control, his body wouldn't obey, and they started dropping like stones. Natalie watched them rocket downward and instantly knew why they were about to slam, because that High Orc had a skill that could paralyze anyone it hit, and Owen was the one who just got caught. Still pinned in Owen's grip, she felt magic surge as he yanked the gravitational release, trying to soften their sudden, crushing drop. The impact slammed him face first into the ground, his shoulder taking the full battering weight, and he snapped out a sharp "gah" as pain ripped through him and he flinched hard. He strained to push himself up, groaning that he couldn't fight or even fly right in the state, freaking out that he'd maybe dislocated his shoulder. Natalie and Farron sprinted over, shouting his name with pure worry. Natalie rushed in to heal him, but he snapped her off, yelling that there was no time, then pushed everyone to just run. The High Orc surged closer and roared that they'd all be wiped out unless they acted now. Then he snapped that they had to go drag the teachers over, swearing he'd hold the creature back himself. Farron felt the weight of it instantly and nodded along with his assessment, but Natalie still balked. Worry was carved all over her face. While the High Orc stared, they spun on their heels and bolted straight into the thick forest, ditching him to wrestle the monster solo. Then the beast bellowed, "Hey!" He shot a brutal glare at the demon, sweat pouring down his brow as he readied his counterattack. "Come on then, demon, over here." With a jolt of magic, he blasted out a gigantic fireball, an exploding ball of flame that tore through the air and smashed straight toward the High Orc, who finally grunted, thrown off by how fast it came for something so huge. A hulking High Orc flexed its monstrous power and obliterated a huge tree with one brutal swing, so he instantly knew one hit from that thing meant game over, and if he kept fighting defensively, he'd get boxed in for good. He figured that even if he could somehow rattle the High Orc, his weaker magic wouldn't leave a dent. Only a heavyweight spell, maybe an Ifrit, had any shot at real damage. At first, he couldn't spot a single opening to unleash that devastating spell, and disappointment hit hard. Then it all clicked. Magic wasn't just brute force, it was about breaking the rules in his head. While he pieced it together, a hooded figure watched him in silence, unseen. Moments later, the High Orc snapped into a stunned panic, wedged right in the middle of a chaotic heap of fallen locks, while the hooded observer watched in shock, because it wasn't just Owen running for his life, it was a crafty plan unfolding in real time. With that High Orc suddenly knocked out cold, Owen shot his chance, jaw set, eyes dead serious. He vowed he'd erase the enemy with hellfire, then snarled a warning, "Look around," because he was going to torch every single log nearby. He slammed the Ifrit spell down, blazing firestorms swallowed the High Orc whole. Sure, he couldn't be certain it'd kill it, but he prayed it would pin that brutal monster in place for long enough. Even in the blazing inferno, the High Orc didn't even blink, its once shocked eyes narrowed to a cold, unshakable stare, screaming pure resilience. Owen's jaw dropped as the High Orc tore out of the flames like it had never been hurt, then unleashed a brutal, sweeping strike that forced Owen to dodge fast. The High Orc stood there, barely bothered by the Ifrit spell, still towering and terrifying, while Owen just stared, dread creeping in as the truth hit him. No matter what he threw at it, his strongest attack didn't stand a chance. Desperation crashed over Owen as he silently begged the teachers to get there fast, because he knew he wouldn't last much longer standing alone. Natalie and Farron thought they were seconds from the safe area, then their wave vanished and horror hit hard. they were totally ringed by a screaming horde of goblins. A goblin-like thing let out a blood-curdling shriek as some invisible force slammed it hard, ripping its body apart. Then a voice cut through the chaos. Time to use blades of wind. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Katarina's worry hit like a punch. Owen needed those teachers, and time was running out fast. Monet looked just as shaken, because yeah, this was getting brutally dire. As they pushed deeper into the thick woods, Katarina couldn't stop wondering if the power they'd just seen belonged to some saint. Then she snapped, "We're leaving now," because with hardly any miasma in the area, they could probably get back safe. Monet thought it over for a second and nodded along. Monet abruptly stopped like something yanked her strings, and a soft glow spilled from her hands as she snapped that she'd go back to where Owen was, leaving Katarina frozen, staring and second-guessing everything she'd just agreed to. Katarina's eyes went wide with panic as she demanded to know what Monet meant, warning that this place was beyond deadly. Yet Monet didn't budge, convinced Owen would have done the same for her. Monet didn't say another word. She whipped around and sprinted straight back into the forest. Katarina shouted after her, begging her to stop, to wait, and at least go tell the teachers what was happening. Her desperate plea rang through the trees, but Monet only shoved deeper into the woods fast while Katarina stood there, stunned, desperate to understand what she was really chasing. As she bolted forward, Monet's face snapped into pure determination. Then it hit her. She should have never run in the first place. "I'm a saintess," she vowed, backing it up with sheer conviction. She kept sprinting, rage and resolve blazing in her chest. No matter the price, she'd throw every last bit of power at helping others, because that's what a saintess lives for, even if it means her own life has to take the backseat. Monet lunged forward, eyes locked ahead, and under her breath she called out a name. "Right, Sophie?" Like she needed it confirmed. Then she hardened her resolve. She had asterisked to do the right thing. She caught sight of him, still breathing, fighting for his life against a monstrous board demon. Her eyes turned steel cold, and she decided on the spot she'd unleash her holy magic to crush the demon's miasma and knock it down. Sure, the high orc hadn't even sensed her. Without so much as a flinch, she hurled her attack, one razor-focused blast of energy, and it tore straight through, driving right for that monstrous beast. To her horror, her attack landed with zero effect. The demon just grunted like nothing happened, totally unbothered. The boar demon snapped and showed off its power. Then it surged with a physical boost, swelling even more and turning its massive body into something downright terrifying. The demon's boosted strength slammed into Owen, launching him flying back. Then Monet snapped into action, throwing herself between them and taking the next hit meant for him. The hit slammed her to the ground, pain screaming through her as she lay there, crying Owen's name, watching him fight tooth and nail through that unrelenting assault. With pain screaming through her, she clawed at her magic to summon a spear of light, but it sputtered and died in her hands. Owen's danger hit her like a gut punch. Owen, sprawled injured under a tree, stared at her with a grim, pained look and snapped, "Why would you throw your life away? If you don't back off, you're going to get yourself killed." Then he locked in, eyes blazing with pure resolve, ready to hammer down a devastating unloading strike, knowing it'd be brutal to land on a moving target and that the recoil would slam back hard, but he had zero options left. He tore forward with a piercing bullet assault, unleashing a razor-focused burst of energy. The projectile slammed into the board demon, and a sharp, pained grunt ripped out of him as dark blood sprayed from the impact. With the demons finally crushed, he crumpled to the ground, spent but breathing easier, convinced he'd done it. Then just moments later, Farron came barreling in, yelling his name with pure worry. She dropped to her knees beside him and pushed her healing power forward at once, while he barely looked at his own wounds. His mind was fixed on Amelia, the one he'd left behind, praying she'd managed to call the teachers. The moment Farron tried to unleash her holy magic, she froze, because she could instantly tell just how wrecked he was, and that wound wasn't something that healed fast. He stared at her, dirt and blood still smeared across his face, and demanded answers. Why come back for him when she could have died doing it? She waved off his worries, claiming his judgment was wrong, but he wouldn't budge, insisting she'd actually come dangerously close to dying. Farron then clenched her resolve and made it crystal clear. Being a saintess meant she had to throw her life on the line for everyone, and she would never walk away from him. She even swore that if it ever came to that, she'd give her life without hesitation, but he pleaded with her not to waste it like that. He replayed her words in his head, trying to figure out if she really meant that wild, extreme generosity, or if there was a darker motive behind it, because the way she hit those statements sounded less like charity and more like danger. From somewhere unseen, a hooded stranger watched it all, captivated by the rare magic on display, even as the girl kept pulling his focus, because he was already planning to deal with her later. The mysterious hooded figure sized up the scene, then backed away and disappeared into the thick foliage, while Owen, still reeling from that brutal attack, stared at the massive boar demon as it crumpled there, dead still. The demon's body jerked and spasmed, its eyes burning with a vile glow, and then it dragged itself upright inch by inch, while a deep growl rumbled from its throat, screaming, "Not today." Subber Demon ripped out a guttural huff, eyes blazing with fresh rage, and Owen froze, because in that instant, the shock hit him hard. His attack wasn't enough, and the thing had already clawed its way back up. He shoved Farron behind him in a rush, yelling for her to stay back, because his battered body was breaking down and he could barely keep going against the reawakened beast. The boar demon barreled in with a spine-chilling roar, then bam, a new girl stepped into the fray, gripping a glittering crystal, and with a cool, steady command, she hurled a spell to slam the beast's charge to a stop. The spell snapped to life and froze the charging boar demon in a towering wall of ice, and Owen, eyes huge, saw the newcomer and blurted out her name, apologizing mid-sentence for being late. The hooded figure kept sprinting away, roaring with rage that their squad couldn't slow down the newcomer even 1 second, then snapped that 3 stars were a nightmare to handle, vanished into the shadows, and swore they'd meet Owen again. Newly arrived, Chris wore a serious, focused face as she scanned the scene, eyes razor-sharp, judging every detail. She spun toward Owen and Farron and demanded, "Are you still alive?" Owen, dazed to the bone, stuttered out a shaky yes, confirming he was still breathing. Owen clutched his chest, gasped in relief, and realized he was still alive, then immediately wondered if the danger had finally slipped away. Out of nowhere, a stranger hauled him into a tight embrace, breathless with relief that he was finally safe, yet he was still spinning, only able to stammer a dazed, confused question about what on earth just happened. She shot him a quick apology for grabbing him so hard, then turned on the spot and told someone else, probably Chris, to go easy on Owen because her words came right after this. Owen's injury had almost killed him, and she'd only barely got him treated in time. As they talked, the other students, Chris, Katerina, Monet, Thor, Kaizef, Student A, Berg, Dominic, and Amelia, crowded in, all breathing easy that everyone was safe, while Owen tried to shrug it off, claiming he definitely hadn't taken down that high order all by himself. He kept going, admitting the creature nearly ended him, and even after that brutal near-death, he made it clear it was his choices that kept everyone else alive. Another student, Berg, pushed forward and praised Owen, telling him he should feel proud, but Owen was still reeling, staring in pure bewilderment like, "Wait, is this really how people see what happened?" Dominic wasn't buying any of it. He snapped at Owen and blasted him as a fool and a coward for recklessly picking a fight with an enemy he didn't even understand, rage spilling over as Dominic nearly died himself, and Owen flinched, eyes darting away from the brutal criticism. He pushed ahead, claiming Owen was just as much a failure unless he'd finally seen how deadly his opponent really was, while Owen's fury surged and he snapped back, asking if Dominic hadn't been the first one to run. Dominic's accusation froze him for a split second, his face twisting into pure shock. Around them, the students stared with wide eyes, but Farron just narrowed hers, annoyance flashing across her face. Still stunned by Owen's brutal counter, Dominic tried to talk himself into it, telling himself that retreat was the right call. Then he spun around, totally thrown by the sudden stare of his peers. Right then, Mori-sensei strode up to Dominic and dropped a steady hand on his shoulder, then calmly backed him up, saying Dominic was dead on. Mori-sensei kept his assessment going and snapped that weaklings should just flee, and Owen froze with a painful look, convinced the teacher was talking straight to him and that it proved he really wasn't good enough. And Mori-sensei shot in fast, praising Owen as special and strong enough to fight his way through and let everyone escape, so that sudden spotlight ripped straight through Owen's chest, forcing him to clench his fists in pure frustration, and Mori-sensei immediately pivoted to Dominic, demanding to know whether Owen, despite everyone calling him weak, hadn't pushed himself to the limit. Dominic finally admitted that Morris-sensei wasn't off the mark, but he couldn't even look him in the eye as he said it. Meanwhile, Foreign watched the clash and worried that Morris's words were cutting too deep, and Owen just stayed crushed, swallowing the fact that the criticism hit home. Owen's mind spiraled with regret, and he couldn't stop replaying it. If he'd been sharper, if he'd thought it through, they might have dodged disaster entirely. He finally admitted the truth. He made the wrong call, and one reckless slip could have ended everyone's lives. A memory slammed into him, one brutal flame bullet ripping through the thick forest, proof of just how vicious that whole encounter really got. That vivid memory snapped something in Owen. He screamed in pain and blamed himself for everything that happened. Then later he slumped against a tree, muttering at himself as the crushing weight of his "I failed" thoughts pinned him down. Even with despair crushing him, Owen felt a brutal spark of resolve ignite, and with a look that screamed, "I can't give up," he vowed with full conviction that he would become stronger no matter what. Chapter 14 opens with an urgent investigation underway in the forest near the royal capital, prompted by the sudden appearance of a high orc. Three cloaked figures, two men and a woman, traverse the dense woods, their expressions serious. The cloaked woman said they'd found traces of the monster, but nothing, no other high orcs, not even a single track, and the cloaked man froze in shock, thinking that kind of monster doesn't just show up out of nowhere. And he held up a small bag and told them he'd found it right at the scene. With her eyes blazing, she kept going. "One tiny shard of crushed magic stone, if you jam it onto the right thing, can fake a monster's power or even call the creature out of hiding," so there was no doubt in her mind. Someone was quietly pulling the strings. Panic hit as a voice barked, "We've got to investigate everything before this trail goes cold," and another voice snapped right back, "Yes, absolutely, do it." Then the story spins to Sansar Academy's summer uniforms, built with royal flair, stitched from comfy, breathable fabric, and finished with badges that flash each student's department and year. On a training ground for first years, this young guy squared up with a towering, blazing Ifrit. Then a booming voice barked at him to lift the magic-made rock first. When the Ifrit swung in, its massive fist smashed the rock into a storm of shards, and the young man snapped back with a furious shout, because he finally understood the truth. The monster wasn't aiming at him at all, it was trying to obliterate the object. Pinned to the ground, the young man stared at his own disaster and begged for a way out, because raw brute strength wasn't going to cut it. He flashed back to his fight with the Orc King and realized he'd been basically hurling fire at a walking person. So now he had one burning question: could he turn that humanoid form into something actually useful? The Ifrit, built from summoning magic that ripped straight from an earlier game, was so easy to control that even basic attacks came on command without a fight. But even then, the young man still couldn't stop himself from asking why he couldn't freely control it to do real moves, like grabbing an enemy or throwing up a defense. A woman with long, reddish-brown hair suddenly stepped in and greeted him casually by name, Owen. Before he could even react, she snapped that he'd been using the training grounds without permission, and it totally threw him. Then she snapped at him that you can't just show up at the training grounds, you need an application and permission, and she grilled him about why he's still out late at night as a student. He started to stammer, panicking to find the right words. Even as he protested that it wasn't fair, she smirked like she'd already won and admitted she'd known all along he was using it without permission. She made it clear that sure, he needed the application, but she'd been watching over him this whole time, and she promised to keep doing it going forward, so he immediately poured out his gratitude. Her tone snapped on a dime. She basically claimed him as her personal errand boy and barked that he needed to check the third-year training grounds right away, and the second he heard it, shock and total disbelief hit him like a truck. He demanded to know why they'd target the third-year ground and why they were dragging this on for so long. She snapped back that the Academy's facilities had been riddled with fresh anomalies lately. Those third-year training grounds kept flooding nonstop, even with no rain in sight, and that weird mystery screamed that someone like him could be behind it. She told him to report everything he stumbled on like she'd deal with any punishment herself, and with a flick of her hand, she booted him out, saying she had work to do. He groaned, agreed anyway, and walked off reluctantly. He slipped toward the spot and leaned around the corner, heart pounding, trying to figure out if this really was the third-year training grounds. His eyes snapped wide with shock when a tiny, white cat-like thing made of shimmering liquid or light suddenly burst into view and leaped straight at him, flickering with sparkling droplets all around. A cheerful girl with short, light-colored hair hugged the mysterious cat-like creature to her chest, and it shimmered like liquid water. Then she beamed so hard it was obvious she was absolutely thrilled to have it there. He stared, eyes like saucers, as that water-made creature launched itself through the air with effortless grace, and beside him the girl froze in shock too, as droplets sprayed around them like a sudden burst of rain. He blustered through his excuse, saying a teacher told him to watch what was going on. Then the girl cut him off cold and called him out straight, Owen Pepper. He shot out an apology and admitted he couldn't even remember if they'd met before, and she went right on to drop his alias, name his home, and hint that he was seriously famous, like, so famous it had to be the guy with two names. As she kept praising him, especially for how he crushed Kaizeth in the martial arts tournament, an unmistakable wave of embarrassment washed over him. Then she introduced herself as Tanya, a third-year student, and he immediately pressed her, who's letting people use the training grounds, especially after dark, because official permission is usually required. She blurted out a quick apology, cheeks burning as he pushed on, grilling her, since she's the senior student, about whether she's been trained in this restricted area too. She spilled the whole mess. Her grades were bad and she had to train on her own, but the training grounds belonged to noble students by day, so all she had left were the late hours to grind. Then he pitched a bold idea: let's train together. He told her that if she was cool with it, he'd be totally fine, and the next thing she knew, she was staring at him in pure shock at his sudden offer. He doubled down and told them straight. His homeroom teacher had given him special permission for his reasons, and even said any penalties would get wiped out if he trained, so he figured training together would be totally safe. He thanked Tanya for nodding along, then asked if she was using magic power circulation as a warm-up. Tanya met his gaze, and surprise flickered across her face. Moments later, Tanya sprawled on the ground, gasping hard, little bursts of breath fogging up as exhaustion hit her full force from that brutal workout. She stayed sprawled on the ground, sweat streaking down her face, cursing how brutal it was to keep her magic power flowing and wondering, really wondering, if Owen was actually that strict with training every single day. Owen watched her struggle, flashed her an encouraging smile, and told her, "Our levels are just different. I felt the same way when I first started too," then promised, "Trust me, you're growing." As he talked, he just lifted off, effortlessly soaring through the sky and proving magic could turn dreams into flight. Tanya stood there with her eyes huge, staring up and blurting out how he even managed to get a spell that insane. He told her it was just the stuff he remembered from a past life. Then Tanya's eyes popped wide, and she clapped hard, blurting out that it was an insanely mind-blowing challenge. Then she dropped her gaze, let out a shaky breath, and admitted she could barely even do basic magic, struggling through her studies just to keep her head above water. Owen didn't back down, his eyes lit up like fireworks, and he insisted she'd pulled off some seriously amazing magic earlier, begging to see it done properly. Tanya blushed, trying to wave it off, saying it wasn't anything worth showing. With a nervous frown, she finally gave in and promised to show him just a slice of her cool side. Then she shouted, "Amaniko, appear before me." The water rippled, and something small and translucent, shaped like a cat, clawed its way out of the depths. Tanya beamed with pride and a hint of embarrassment as she held up the glowing, water-powered feline spirit and declared, "This is spirit magic, my soul's specialty," and the creature stretched out before letting out a soft little meow. Her spirit magic lit up in a way he'd never seen before, and he froze, eyes wide, jaw slack, completely stunned by what he was witnessing. As the shock hit him, she leaned in and said spirit magic wasn't just spells. It meant forging living, self-moving things with their own will, and the spirits inside them were the reason the whole magic is even called what it is. Then she dropped the bomb. He was using it too. He grilled her, wondering if that Ifrit he'd summoned, moving and acting like it had a mind of its own, was really some kind of spirit magic, and he admitted it was the first time he'd ever heard of anything like that. She confirmed his worst fear. Turns out that Ifrit was real spirit magic, but he couldn't control it the way she could, and the frustration hit hard as he slumped over, shoulders caving in. Fierce determination flared in his chest as he stared down the idea of stealing the Ifrit's free movement and weaving it into his own powers. With fresh determination burning in his chest, he stared her down and begged, no, pleaded for her to teach him the hidden secrets of spirit magic. His sudden request blew her mind, and her eyes went wide with pure shock. She blurted a protest, cheeks burning, firing back questions like, "Why would a Class A noble like you want me to teach you?" while swearing she was wrong because he was the amazing magic user. He snapped back, telling them he was hungry to get way stronger, and insisting that training side-by-side trading lessons would make both of them level up fast. She says nothing, just stares, still soaking in his words, her face caught between deep thought and a wave of overwhelmed shock. She finally gave in, beaming like she couldn't wait, and even Owen got pulled into it too. Just like that, they kicked off their secret special training and dove straight into the mysteries of his one-of-a-kind powers. Just when he started, one thought wouldn't let him go: Tanya could use water magic, so why was the training ground already burned to a crisp? He tried to summon a giant flame bullet, gritting through sheer strain as sweat poured down his brow while the fiery spell fought to form. Rage kept building in him. This wasn't the magic of his Ifrit at all. Right behind him, that monstrous, uncontrolled Ifrit reared up like a living nightmare, glaring proof of the power he hadn't learned to tame yet. Out of nowhere, a voice blasted through his thoughts, snapping that copying Owen's magic was impossible for him. Then it dared, asking who here wanted to be burned alive. A fresh figure stepped in, this young man with a confident grin, and he tossed off a casual comment about how sharp the smell of blood hung in the air. He introduced himself as Leo, confessed he'd been watching for 3 long years, and said he wanted to help his cute junior, while Owen, still suspicious, snapped, "So what's your real purpose?" Owen slammed down the offer and swore he could train on his own, but Leo grabbed his outstretched hand and cut him off, saying there was no way he'd ever catch Owen's level solo. Leo went on to warn him that without the martial arts tournament, with everyone's hopes pinned on Owen alone, the gap between them would keep growing, while Owen just stood there, visibly torn between distress and raw frustration. Leo stepped in and offered his help, telling Owen that if all he wanted was to copy strength, then quitting solitary training wasn't the answer. He needed to rethink everything. Leo even pressed him on whether he was actually satisfied with where he was headed, because leveling up required a whole different approach. He pressed on with his pitch, claiming he could make Dominic stronger, then leaned in and asked if Dominic was even interested in the power of a witch. Dominic's eyes went wide, his mouth fell open, and all he could sputter out was, "Witch?" Before the man paused, staring at Dominic Kuhn like he was checking the name, verifying he had the right person. From the shadowed cloak, the figure talked about the witch, the worst of the calamities and a former mage of the 3 stars, then revealed her crimes, how the king had her condemned for chasing forbidden immortality experiments. Dominic listened with his eyes stretched wide, fear gripping his gut as the truth hit. He flinched back hard, swearing he'd never become like Owen, because Owen could actually wield magic, while the cloaked figures just grinned and watched his furious reaction. The cloaked figure leaned in and told Dominic the choice of what he'd chase was his, but he'd crave power, no doubt about it. Meanwhile, Chris-sensei, after officially giving the green light, grinned like he already knew exactly how this would play out. During training, the schoolgirl shouted Isekai'D and called her familiar into existence, while Dominic yelled Ifrit as his own blazing spirit burst into being. Moments later, that Isekai'D darted in and snatched the flag again, and Dominic just crumbled in frustration, defeated again. The schoolgirl gave him a guilty little shrug and admitted she'd won once more, then pointed out, yet again, that he wasn't even listening to a word she said. He stared at Tanya's freedom and realized he couldn't match her speed at all. Then the schoolgirl nodded, saying sure, he was strong, but he was missing something crucial, that sharp, agile nimbleness. She kept going, claiming he had no real weight, or maybe he was just too shallow to see the bigger truth. Then the Isekai'D cut in, asking if she meant spirit magic itself, or maybe if this was about slipping back into the original form, while the schoolgirl shrugged and said she'd always had a cat at home, so she knew how they move. She told Dominic to watch his target like Owen did, and once he did, his own moves would click into place like they were always natural. Then she asked about Ifrit, something he'd never heard of before, and he froze, wondering if it was a callback from his past life, like a thought that wouldn't come out of his mouth. She kept staring ahead, wondering if monsters really lived in this world, and he only shrugged, saying he named the Ifrit that way without giving it a second thought. His head spun, he finally realized he'd never actually studied the monsters of this world, and now, the plan she'd pushed, watching them up close, suddenly felt impossible and totally out of reach. She told him spirits were way easier to forge when you started with something living, but her sea cat was only a lifelike model, never a real creature. Then she said you could still make up for what you couldn't directly observe by leaning on other evidence and real experience. At last it clicked for him. Then, switching gears, she asked if he was free the next day. He stalled for a second and finally admitted he didn't have any real plans. The moment she heard he was free, her eyes lit up and a bright grin stretched across her face as she practically begged him to go out and play. The very next day, the two of them ended up in the middle of a loud, crowded shopping district, somewhere she'd only been a few times before, while he stared at the non-stop crush of people, and she kept asking if it was even okay for them to be there today, leaving him to wonder if this outing was turning into a mistake. Then he asked straight up if she always came by with Tanya-san, only for her to look aside and admit quietly that she had no friends at all. His eyes shot wide with shock at her confession, then she laid it all out. As a commoner, her grades were slipping and the noble kids wouldn't so much as look her way, but her smile kept growing as she insisted it didn't matter because she'd only been worried about Owen. He stared at her and it hit him hard. She was truly a good person, even with all the weight she carried. Dominic suddenly got himself stuck in a tense situation when Owen blurted out, loud as a megaphone, that he was Tanya-san's friend, claiming he had a direct connection to her. The sudden announcement exploded like a spark, and the nearby students snapped into shocked whispers, all staring around in disbelief. Meanwhile, the schoolgirl went pale with surprise at Owen's audacious claim, then blushed hard as her mind raced, wondering what he was planning to do. Then he swung back to the schoolgirl and told her the truth. Years ago, he'd had 0 friends, but Tanya-san had stepped in and taught him so much. With a gentle bow, he asked for her guidance for the rest of the day, and she answered softly, thanking him back with warmth. They pushed deeper into the roaring city district, surrounded by jaw-dropping architecture and a towering clock looming over everything. While they explored, the schoolgirl froze to admire a potted flower, and he leaned in, studying something on the ground right beside her. Her mood skyrocketed. She beamed a bright, wide smile and clutched that little decorative trinket she'd just gotten. Later, they huddled together and dug into hot dogs. She took one bite and practically declared them the most delicious thing ever. After all that traveling, she stared at him and Blur answered the silence, asking if he'd managed to dig up even a single useful hint. She snaps into a gasp, realizing she'd gotten so lost in their time together that she'd totally forgotten something crucial. She quickly walks back what she just said, brushes it off as a joke, and tells him she's actually relieved it was his sake that brought them out. Dominic's eyes widen as he blurts out what she really meant, and she finally admits she'd been stuck the whole time, and that she only needed to get to one exact place. She leans in and tells you this. Her family runs a little commoner shop, and sure, they're nobody special, but her parents still know she can handle spirit matches. The story snaps to an intimidating shot of the academy, this massive, grand place her parents fought tooth and nail to get her admitted to. She sighs and admits the tuition money is brutally hard to juggle. Yeah, she's got a scholarship, but her grades still aren't high enough to cover the full cost. Then she tells him, nail the next exam and you unlock a way better scholarship. Just like that, she turns to Dominic and asks, will you help me study? He nods and says, we've got one more stop today, the central clock tower. She tilts her head back at the giant structure, eyes narrowed like she's already piecing something together. She tells Dominic that folks swear if you make a wish at the very top, it'll come true, yet he raises an eyebrow, dead skeptical, and pushes back like, is that even real? With a fierce look in her eyes, she snatches his hand and hauls him forward, shouting that they have to reach the clock tower right now. The grand clock tower, this legendary city landmark, stood blazing against the sky, its crazy detailed architecture screaming centuries of secrets, and that's exactly where they were rushing. As she dragged Dominic through the loud, crowded streets, the schoolgirl practically shoved him forward, begging him to hurry, because the tower would lock up by evening. Then boom, chaos exploded. Thief yanked a wallet right out of a stranger's grasp, and she screamed in pure panic. Her eyes narrowed, burning with pure determination as she clocked the theft, while Dominic stared, wide-eyed in shock. Then a tiny white, cat-like creature with a faint glow popped into existence beside them, ready to spring into action. He spun toward escape with the stolen wallet clutched in his fist, only to slam into a shocking sight that ripped the words out of his mouth. He hissed a curse under his breath and dashed for a tight alley, but that glowing cat creature wouldn't let up, charging right at his heels. Tucked deep in that alley, a burly man with a thick goatee stood surrounded by his intimidating crew, clocking the thief instantly, and warning him that this alley's maze-like streets and weak security always leave trouble behind, so he better not linger. Meanwhile, the schoolgirl spotted Dominic slipping after her and snapped, "Dominic, wait," then blurted his name with a panicked look, begging him to hold up. He ignored her begging and launched into a full sprint, his sheer determination stomping on every shred of caution as he chased the thief down. He swept his gaze over the scene and realized he could track the thief even without a straight view, just look down from above. Right as he was hunting for where the thief vanished, he spotted the schoolgirl blasting through the air over the alley, and the thugs beneath her gaped upward in pure shock. The thief lurched forward, soaked-headed and totally rattled, cursing as he insisted that the cat creature's weird magic had hit him, snapping him straight into this mess. He shrieked in pure terror as the schoolgirl's voice sliced through the alley, blasting him with a warning to watch his step, while the thief, still gripping his stolen loot, spiraled in full-blown panic. Moments later, the noise sucked in a few curious faces and the schoolgirl stood right there, watching the thief get pinned in place, surrounded by several people, his escape completely shut down. With everything finally calming down, Owen strode up to Tanya, grinning like he'd won, and proudly held up the recovered bag of stolen goods, declaring the whole mess was over. Then he told Tanya the culprit had already been caught by the self-defense magic users, and she hung on every word, nodding along as that iconic clock tower rose in the distance. Owen flashed a thumbs up, praising the sea cat for snapping up the thief fast, and Tanya only murmured a soft, "I see," while Dominic right there watched on, eyes sharp with thought. Tanya shifted her gaze, and a soft smile tugged at her lips like she'd just spotted a whole new outcome to chase. She leaned in and confessed to Dominic that she'd been thinking about quitting the academy for real, and you could see the shock hit him like lightning. She quickly admitted the truth, she'd been doubting herself, but that latest incident slammed her fear into the ground and lit a new confidence in her chest, proving her magic could actually matter. With a fierce look in her eyes, Tanya announced that magic was finally fun to her, and she vowed to bust her butt before the next exam. As they headed off, Tanya blurted out that she'd been craving the clock tower, but it was already too late now. Dominic walked right beside her, eyes stuck on the ground, caught in a storm of thoughts. He slammed his fist down and swore he'd take her there, then she blinked in shock and pointed straight at the distant clock tower, confirming she'd caught his meaning. Owen and the schoolgirl faced a door stamped **close **, like it was welded shut. The moment she asked how they were even supposed to get past the obvious blockage, the silence felt like an answer. Out of nowhere, Owen lunged and snatched her up, yanking a startled yelp from her lips. Then he flashed a cocky smirk, staring her down like, "So who do you really think I am?" Moments later, he rocketed into the sky, carrying her effortlessly on his back, shouted, "Owen of the soaring wings," and told her he'd stripped away gravity, proving he'd mastered flight magic, while the schoolgirl stared in pure shock, unable to believe what she was feeling. Up in the sky, the schoolgirl leaned over the edge and stared down at the sprawling city like it was a dream, completely blown away, and she couldn't stop praising Owen, gushing about how insane his flying skills were. Their sky run kept rolling and she flashed a confident smile, sure this counted as the real deal. Then, once they were safely inside a building, she faced Owen with a hard, serious look and asked for a favor. They sat there in peaceful bliss, staring down at the world below, and she swore she'd never forget that breathtaking view they'd shared. A few days later, Chris sat there smiling, content as she happily crunched on a cookie, then blurted out that this was exactly what she wanted, and thanked Owen with real gratitude. She then admitted the cookies were insanely hard to get and groaned about the mess-up with Natalie, then flashed a cheeky smirk and bragged that because of her, Tanya and Owen were getting special training now, while Owen and the schoolgirl just looked completely fed up with her stunt. With a mouthful of cookies still going, Chris-sensei kept talking, drumming into Owen that he needed to lock in his test prep and hit the submission deadline that was creeping closer by the minute. Owen only nodded, like he'd already accepted the inevitable. In the outskirts, a bunch of glowing, cat-like sea creatures frolicked around, then one of them blurted, "Sea cat." Tanya's grin lit up as she told Owen the news. Thanks to him, she could summon two at once now, and the whole time they'd been gearing up, she'd even unlocked fresh magic for the upcoming test. As Tanya spoke, Owen's face instantly twisted with worry. She swore she'd grind hard for Chris-sensei, but Owen was stuck on one thing, Chris-sensei's harsh warning that the application deadline was today. Even with nerves chewing at him inside, he shrugged it off with a massive grin and flashed Tanya a playful question. Could she really forget something this crucial? Tanya looked away, and a hot blush of embarrassment crept across her face. It hit them both at the exact same moment, eyes flying wide with terror, faces twisting into full-blown panic as they both screamed, completely wiping the deadline from their minds. Owen doesn't even blink. He spots Tanya's arm and shoves her forward, barking that there's no time to waste. Tanya snaps into it instantly, and they bolt, not realizing Leo is watching them from behind a wall with a sneaky smirk curling on his lips. Days later, when the deadline panic finally faded, Owen was back in magic control class, showing off proudly that he could sling a fireball about 3 meters straight on command, and Leo's eyes lit up. Watching him, Leo asked if Owen had a special trick, and Owen just smirked like he was one step ahead, hinting at a. Right as Owen wrapped up his demo, Leo strode over to him and Dominic, and his voice went sharp with questions. Then he flat-out demanded to Dominic, had he really been sneaking off to train with commoners under the cover of night? Dominic's eyes snapped wide with panic, and he fired back, furious, demanding how Leo found out about it. A cruel smile spread across his face as he kept going, sneering about the commoner and making it clear those moves would get them tossed out of the academy. Owen caught the warning in Leo's tone and snapped right away. "Was that Tanya you meant?" His worry showing instantly, and even as Dominic stayed baffled by Leo's accusations, he blurted, "What are you talking about?" Leo waved off their questions with a smirk that didn't budge, and deep down he thought, "I saw that girl the other day," showing he already knew Tanya was behind it. With a cruel smirk on his face, he mused that commoners always got their place wrong, so someone had to teach them a lesson and do it kindly. Tanya sprinted through the halls, clutching her application so hard her knuckles went white, terrified she'd missed the deadline. Then a stranger stepped in front of her and demanded to know who she was. Then he told her straight up that turning in that kind of document would be completely pointless. His smirk stretched into something mean as he grilled her about tuition fees, acting like she had no clue at all, and then he dropped the real bombshell. The whole exam was rigged from the start. With a furious glare, he snapped that this system didn't need useless commoners at all. Tanya's eyes snapped wide with pure disbelief as those brutal words hit him, right where it hurt. He kept hammering the same point: if commoners weren't kept in their lane, the whole academy would get swarmed, and then he doubled down, saying magic itself belonged only to the nobility. Tanya recoiled, stunned by the sheer force of his words. Leaning in close, he spat that commoners with mediocre magic were worthless, too weak to serve nobles, and not worth using for their plans. With one brutal shove, he sent Tanya flying back, then burst into a taunting laugh, pointing at the nearby door like it was her verdict, saying he'd finally taught her a lesson for daring to leave her station. Then his eyes shot wide open, and pure shock blasted away his cruel smirk. Rage kept boiling in his veins as his face twisted with fury, and Owen scrambled to grab him and tell him to calm down. Meanwhile, Tanya stood firm, shot down his claims, and insisted on her own hard-earned right as a commoner. Rage kept swelling in him as his voice climbed higher. He insisted he was doing them a favor by smashing their pointless hopes, then demanded they thank him for his kindness. Then he snapped his venom at Tanya, calling her talentless and mocking her arrogance, right after bringing up how she'd frozen in fear the moment the High Orc came for her. His rage exploded into his face, and then, just as fast, it vanished, replaced by stunned disbelief as the truth hit him like a bolt of lightning. A sharp gasp rolled through the crowd as Chris-sensei snapped into action. Her voice cutting through the chaos, she ordered Leo and Owen to stop, breathe, and get their heads straight. Then she swung her attention to Leo and pressed him about his loud, blow-by-blow rant earlier, only for Leo to already pivot toward the exit, muttering curses at Owen as he tried to bolt. As he sprinted, a tidal wave of fury-laced thoughts drowned him. He cursed the whole mess, the sheer unfairness, and even Chris-sensei, wondering if her words meant she saw him as weak too. His frantic dash pulled him out of danger, shooting him past the looming elementary classroom building like a trapdoor closing behind him. Meanwhile, Owen panicked and tore through the classrooms hunting for Tanya, but she was nowhere in sight, and the terrifying question hit him: where had she vanished to? Then he spotted her. Tanya stood right there, and with a look of mild surprise on her face, Owen blurted her name out. Owen rushed up to her, his voice shaking with concern as he demanded to know why she was quitting, while Tanya, sitting on the ground, suggested that Chris-sensei might help with the petition, and Owen shot back with a worried question about whether she really meant to go through with it. She admitted that their family money was in real trouble, and hanging around the noble kids had been a brutal struggle for her. Even after she chose to leave the academy, she made it crystal clear she'd loved her training with Owen and she wouldn't quit magic for good. As they walked off, Owen cursed his own timing. He'd wanted to hide her choice and dodge this kind of gut-wrenching fallout. Then he let his rage spill out, trapped in pure helplessness as he struggled to fix the cruel noble discrimination and her desperate financial ruin. Tanya stared back at him, stunned by how intense his words were. With pure fire in his eyes, Owen blurted out that they were taking the graduation exam, no hesitation, no backing down. Tanya clutched a tiny suitcase and asked if he really meant a graduation exam or if this was her chance to leave. Owen didn't even flinch. He said, dead set, that she wasn't allowed to withdraw. She grinned, seeing her own stubborn streak mirrored right back in him, and he pushed her to prove, right now, what her efforts had already accomplished. Tanya shot her hand up and summoned water, the lifeblood of the world, to unleash its power and summon the sea cats. Right at her feet, two cat-like water spirits started to form, circling her with their own. Owen stared, eyes huge, as the water spirits finally snapped into place, shaping themselves into clear, feline forms right in front of him. Hania beamed with pride and pointed straight at the sky, where a shimmering rainbow now arched like a brand new spell, and she proudly declared, "That's my magic." Then she couldn't help blurting, "But is it okay to have something this beautiful that doesn't seem to do anything practical?" She sank into deep thought, and her mind kept circling back to one tiny word, I. Moments later, she spun toward Dominic and asked if he'd really made it through graduation. He lit up, grinning wide as he confirmed he passed clean, with 0 complaints. The academy loomed under a gloomy sky like a monument to dreams, and right in the middle of it all, a voice rang out congratulating a graduate, while another promise, whispered long ago, kept hammering in my head. Someday I'd prove myself and go meet her, but as Dominic stood there, lost in his own thoughts, another student slid up to him and told him, calm as ever, that they'd been waiting for him to show up. Suddenly, Owen burst onto the scene, face twisted with panic, and snapped at Dominic, right to his face, demanding whether he'd really wanted power that badly. Winter clung to the academy as Chris Sensei stepped up before the class and warned them term-end exams were coming fast, and how they did would decide whether they jumped up to the next grade, so stop slacking and hit the books. She spun around to Dominic and asked, "Are you ready for the tests coming up?" Tanya, right there beside her, shot back with total confidence that he'd have 0 trouble with the written and the practical, and then she grinned and dared him to see who'd win. The moment the first 2 days of written exams kicked off, Dominic planted himself at his desk and poured out answers without missing a beat, proud of the fact that he'd been locked in during class, convinced he could crush a theoretical magic test built to prove they really understood. On day 3, the practical exam finally kicked off. Chris Sensei stepped in front of the whole class and told them to prove they could master long-range magic with one thing on the line, their control over their mana. Targets sat right in front of them, begging to be blasted by magical energy, and they'd get ranked on 2 things, how dead on their spells were and how hard they hit. Dominic stepped forward like he owned the battlefield, trusting every ounce of his long-range mastery. Then he snapped his eyes in and detonated a brutal fire zone spell. A blast of powerful magic detonated with terrifying force, vaporizing his intended targets and wiping out a bunch of unsuspecting students nearby too, while the whole surrounding crowd just stared in shock as he grinned, thrilled by how utterly unstoppable his power was. Chris Sensei stared at the wreckage with a tight frown, clearly pissed, and snapped that he'd already hit other targets, meaning his score was about to take a hit. He snapped into a hilarious mix of shock and disgust, realizing his brutal but careless attack had backfired right onto his own grate. Owen, who'd been staring Dominic down, stepped forward with shaky but certain confidence, then blurted out that he was about to unleash his own monstrous black flame bullet, ready to steal the spotlight and beat Dominic at his own game. Owen just threw down his challenge and snap, he slammed up an earth wall to stop Dominic's incoming attack. Dominic froze, stunned, because he finally realized Owen was aiming for him again on purpose. Senpai, with Tanya at her side, stared on, their concern climbing fast. His crushing black flame bullet slammed into the earth wall, melted it on the spot, and left Dominic reeling in disbelief at the raw destructive power. He immediately snapped an ice shield into existence, raising a jagged wall of frozen fury to block any counterattack Dominic might throw his way. Meanwhile, Chris Sensei watched the chaos unfold and snapped with pure exasperation at Owen's antics, but he only grinned and tossed out a careless apology, claiming his hands slipped. Schoolgirl_1 and Tony_Senpai just kept staring on, worry written all over their faces. He sauntered up to Dominic, ruffled his head with a playful tap, and shot him a mischievous grin as he asked, "Did you get hurt?" Chris Sensei confronted him and said straight up, his attitude was weird, but if he swore it was just an accident, she'd let it slide, because if he didn't, she'd have to kick him out of the practical exam. He nodded right away like it was no big deal. Once the exam was officially over and the students scattered, he yanked Dominic in by the collar and demanded answers. What was he doing earlier? Dominic just blinked, completely thrown off by the sudden attack. He leaned in close, smirking like he owned the moment, then apologized for breaking Dominic's weak magic, his voice sweet as candy but packed with smug condescension. As Dominic watched him storm off, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another Owen brawl. Something about the way Owen's hand moved as he left felt seriously off. He locked his eyes forward and unease crept in as he replayed Owen's weird behavior and realized just how dark, terrifying, and real that Black Flame Bullet's power actually was. Out of nowhere, a foreign woman stepped up to him and asked politely if they could talk, so when he pressed for what it was about, she told him to move somewhere more private since this spot was totally unsuitable. Once she found a quiet, secluded spot, she dropped the bombshell that the whole conversation was about him, Dominic. She then blurted out her worries, asking straight up if he didn't sense something off about that guy. He pushed for details and she started to explain that lately, no matter the grade, there'd been all kinds of interactions, but then her voice caught and she hesitated, like she wasn't ready to go on with it. His face froze in shock as she blurted out the truth. Ever since those encounters started, she's been feeling a nasty miasma spilling off him, and it all came crashing into view. He kept pressing me, asking what my asthma really was, and he swore it was the kind of thing demons would spit out. Then she nodded and told him straight, "Yep, it's dangerous, and no human was ever meant to carry something like that. The miasma could twist a demon's body like it was nothing, but if that demon couldn't take the brutal, rapid changes, it would die for sure." Alarm bells blared as he tried to cut in, but she steamrolled right past him, saying humans couldn't handle something like that, admitting she wasn't 100% sure, yet making it clear his feelings weren't the point. She dropped an apology, owning up to how selfish her choice had been. She'd just been chasing the comfort of avoiding regret. He looked shaken, then quietly asked the only thing that mattered. Was it really okay, as long as she was sure about her decision? Later, alone, he replayed the conversation in his head, then it hit him. This wasn't just someone else's problem. Worry surged in him, and he decided he had to investigate fast or shut down whatever was brewing before it exploded. He burst onto a crowded street where the city's noise slammed into his ears, and right beside him, Farron shot him a quick question about where they were headed, eyes locked on the road ahead. She jabbed a finger toward that skinny alley, wondering out loud if any shops even hid in there, and he stared at the path like it might bite, eyes sharp, mind on guard. They kept chasing through twisting streets, with towering buildings looming above them as they barreled forward. They rounded the corner sure they'd catch their target, only to find the alley totally empty, and he couldn't hide his shock at how fast they vanished. The trail slammed to a dead end, just a brick wall cutting them off. He stared, baffled, wondering where the person they'd been chasing could have disappeared, while she, foreign to the place, clenched with a grim look and felt a lingering presence still hanging in the air. He stared at that wall and wondered if a hidden door might be hiding in plain sight, then spun to the foreign girl and grilled her. "Do you really think our target could be tucked away inside that solid barrier?" He paused, waited, and admitted, it just might be possible. Then he barreled straight at the door, yelling for the wall to open, only to realize that one magic word alone wouldn't cut it. Farron watched him struggle and demanded, "So what are you trying to do?" Without flinching, he announced he'd unleash wind magic, piping it straight into the wall, then broke it down. This wasn't some basic spell, it was a brand new way to carry sound on the air like radio waves, and he promised Farron it would slip through the wall without a hitch. Farron heard Dominic's voice and snapped to the fact he was talking to someone, then panic flared in her gut, screaming for him to stop before his power pushed too far and everything went dangerously wrong. She stood amid swirling magic and demanded answers from Farron about the medicine, because who in their right mind talks about that stuff in some back alley? Panic twisted Farron's face as she blurted out desperately to everyone His focus, locked on his wind magic, snapped in an instant, and he jerked his head up, wide-eyed like, "Wait, what's going on?" right as the foreigner who stood nearby leaned in with worried eyes. Suddenly, his focus snapped to the alley entrance when several figures spilled out, turning the place into a shock, students swarming around them, unexpected and downright unsettling. One student with long, messy hair and wild eyes lunged forward, jabbing an accusing finger straight at them and roaring demands about what Dominic and Farn were doing there, his voice dripping pure aggression. His face twisted harder, eyes bulging and bloodshot, and a thin trickle of saliva slipped from his lips. Then he kept raging, shouting that they wanted that medicine too, like his words were proof of a sick, unshakable fixation. Dominic shot him a stunned look, thrown off by the student's deranged state, while the foreign woman's grim face tightened. She could feel a deep illness rolling off his agitated body. What the hell was wrong with him? With him, he kept blabbering, his voice climbing higher and higher as he insisted the medicine was his, and he'd never let anyone snatch it away, his eyes bulging with raw, panicked fury. With everything going downhill fast, Dominic yanked Farn's hand and shoved her to run. Then they both bolted out of the alley, leaving those deranged students eating dust behind them.